Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
Seth had 8 attribute points and decided to put them all into intelligence. He felt good with the rest of his attributes, so it did not hurt increasing his INT to 28. Still, this meant he could only forge the tooth for 36 minutes. He also tried to see how much he needed to forge the snake ribs he had. The effect it had on the ribs was tremendous, and so was the mana consumption. Forging bones got rid of the porous structure within the bone and made it solid like ivory. This huge change cost 15 mana per minute, 3 times as much as the teeth. The performance of the resulting weapon was a lot better than when he ground it from the bone, but only comparable to the tooth. The only upside was that he had a lot more material. Seth's mana regeneration was also not the greatest, so for every half hour he forged like this, he would need to wait 2 hours to fully recover. He had wanted to raise blacksmith a little more before he tried to forge souls, but with things like this, he decided to just try it. The first possibility that soul forging gave him was to freely change the size of the soul. As an incorporeal substance, it was not bound to a specific size. As such, he could use a single soul to make something small like a ring, or something big like a shield. He just needed to forge it into shape. Sharon's obel made the otherwise intangible souls tangible, and they felt like a tough material under the hits of the hammer. It was like forging a steel ball, just that the souls only needed the slight touch of the soul fire to soften. He used a small soul to make a simple bracer, and dunked it into the water of sticks. He had expected some special announcement, but it was only the regular notification that he finished an item. Soul bracer, left. Common. Magic def, 15. 1 plus 10 mana. A simple soul armor piece. Can be worn as is or infused into a physical bracer. Soul armor gave bonus mana. When Seth thought about it, it made sense. From what he understood of souls until now, was that they were a kind of energy source. His experiment with creating a permanent enchantment with soul infusion showed that souls had mana and mana regeneration. Undead were the same. How could undead have unlimited stamina and not die despite not eating or drinking anything? He did not know where the energy came from, but this solved his mana problem. Maybe this was the reason why the hammer even had the option. Had he made it as an uncommon hammer, he would probably have a full armor made of souls, and a great pool of mana by the time it grew to be rare. Like many other skills, soul forging had no progress bar, but making soul armor gave proficiency in blacksmith. The simple bracer gave him 0.3%. Did this change with the soul use? Seth made another bracer from the soul medium he still had from experimenting. Soul bracer, right. Common. Magic def, 125. 1 plus 77 mana. A simple soul armor piece. Can be worn as is or infused into a physical bracer. 77 mana, and 125 magic defense. The armament made using a medium soul had roughly 8 times the effects of the small one and gave 3% proficiency in blacksmith. This was great. He could easily solve his mana shortage like this. And once his blacksmith grew further, he would also be able to make even better soul armament. As long as his skills grew, it would be a virtuous cycle, and he would become stronger and stronger. All he needed were the raw material, of which he had not many left. He barely had 20 small souls left now. Just enough to make some more experiments. He tried infusing some of the small souls into the first bracer, and he could see the defense and additional mana increase by 8 on average with every soul he infused. After 9 souls, the left bracer had attained stats comparable to the right bracer. Seth tried equipping them, and they sank into his skin. He could not see it, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he could feel that he wore the armor. It did not feel like regular armor, but more like a soft and warm sleeve enveloping his arm. In his status window, he could see the second layer of item slots appear. These were the places the equipped soul armor was shown. At this point, his mana had regenerated, and with the 2 bracers, he had an additional 154 mana and 249 magic defense. There was something else he wanted to see, so he forged 2 of the snake ribs into saber blades. It was fast since the ribs already had the right curve for the weapon. This empties his mana reserve, and Seth could observe his mana regeneration. After raising his INT, he needed a little less than 2 hours to regenerate his mana, so it was roughly 1% a minute. What happened was that he needed maybe 13 minutes to get to 154, and then it slowed down. The rest needed the 2 hours to regenerate. The mana regeneration of the soul armor was almost 10% per minute. This was a crazy speed for Seth, a blacksmith. He had no skills to increase his mana regeneration as a caster class had, but now he had a rapidly regenerating additional mana pool. It was a shame that he had no active skills that used mana. It was like pearls thrown before pigs. But Finn would massively benefit from this. It was finally something he could make for the fairy, as soul armor had no set size, and did not block any item slots. The last thing he wanted to try was engraving the soul armor. How awesome would it be, if he could technically enchant himself? If he could find the right enchantment, he could turn the soul armor into a growth time of sorts. As long as he kept fusing in souls, the enchantments could grow stronger and stronger. Reality put a stop to his premature dreams. The regular engraving tools could not leave a single scratch mark in the soul armor. They could not even touch it, and went right through. After being depressed for a moment, Seth remembered the perk list and Sharon's obel. It was not impossible to make tools that could change a soul. So maybe he would get something like this later, if he leveled his soul forging or enchantment far enough. Unbeknownst to him, Serena had snuck into his room, and had watched him and the up and downs of his mood for the last hours. Seth almost had a heart attack when she took a deep breath. "Is something troubling you? What are you working on?" she asked, interested. She had seen him switching back and forth between forging bone and vigorously hammering thin air. It aroused the question of whether Seth had lost his mind, or was really working on something she could simply not see. In the end, she could not suppress an curiosity and asked. Seth was dumbfounded for a moment. "Okay, but you have to swear not to tell anyone." "I will never tell anyone." "Pinky promise." She swore the holy oath and made a pinky promise with him, so Seth simply told her what he was trying to do, and tried to keep it as simple as possible. "Can't you just use those invisible things to make something to work in them?" she asked innocently. "That's it." The scales fell from his eyes. Of course. Of course, the hint was in the description. Soul weapons can damage souls directly. It should be possible to make an engraving iron from a soul. He pulled the small girl into a tight hug, and she kept giggling as he thanked her and praised her. What an intelligent girl she was and what not. After praising her to the high heaven, he went back to the anvil. He used one of his remaining souls to try and forge a graver from it. Soul graver. Common. A primitive tool to engrave patterns upon souls. It was really a success, even the system acknowledged it as a tool. He tested the new tool on a fresh bracer he made from a small soul. He used the enchantment he had gotten from the ancient bronze scrap. It was supposed to raise defense and health. The result resembled his experiment on the sword. The mana pool was simply too small, so the mana regeneration was unable to keep up with the consumption of the enchantment. This happened despite the enchantment needing a lot less mana per minute, when it was directly engraved on the soul. Not enough mana? No problem. It needed another 2 souls and the enchantment permanently worked. In exchange, the bonus mana would regenerate slower. It depended on whether the enchantment used the same amount of mana as was regenerated. Seth was curious, what would happen if he reforged this bracer? He heated the bracer a little in the forge, and the first hit of the hammer smoothed out the engraving, destroying the enchantment. He had no problem turning the soul into a simple ring. It was a good thing, he could salvage souls with little loss. Soul ring. Common. Magic def, 25. 1 plus 34 mana. A simple ring forged from a soul. There were more ideas he had, but he had not enough souls and other material to do it with clear consciousness. The last thing he did was to fuse his last souls into the ring and strengthen it further. Soul ring. Common. Magic def, 145. 1 plus 141 mana. A simple ring forged from a soul. In the following weeks, Seth alternated between forging the snake materials until his mana ran out and spending time with Finn, Serena, and the little Ivysaur. One of these days the little Ivysaur suddenly popped out of the pet space, when was just having a short break from forging. Seth. I finally did it, it said excitedly. Surprised, the blacksmith asked the caterpillar what he had done. Didn't you ask me some time ago about holy gold? I can finally make it now. Ever since they started the journey, the little Ivysaur was occupied with learning the art of making the ancient bronze from the memories of his ancestors. One component was the inner energy unique to his race. To grow this energy, it had to absorb a lot of energy from the sun to grow its own reserves. That's why it had spent most of its time on the airship sitting and playing with Finn on the main deck. Finally, I had succeeded in learning the art, and the system even turned it into a skill. Now he just needed to eat copper and tin, or regular bronze. The caterpillar explained all this to the blacksmith, who kept nodding his head like a bobblehead. To be honest, he had actually somewhat forgotten about the ancient bronze recently and felt a little guilty for it. The Ivysaur had used so much time and effort for him. But listening to the explanation, he started to get excited again. All the soul stuff was one thing, but being the only one able to make an uncommon metal was also substantial. All right, should we try it? Seth asked and brought out the copper or an ingot he had farmed in the cave and tin he had bought in Zyke. Just because the bronze had been pushed to the back of his mind recently, did not mean he had not prepared back then. The Ivysaur had slightly grown, but the amount of material Seth had stocked up on was way too much for it. It nibbled just a few chunks of ore and then they had to wait. The materials had to be digested first. They would then mix with the energy in its body and the little Ivysaur started spitting thin threads of ancient bronze from its mouth. The build-up on the ground like a crumpled spider net. It took a while, but with a tiny squeak, the threads stopped shooting out. The little caterpillar was heaving for air, and was totally exhausted. Sorry, that all I can do in one go, it apologized, comparing the tiny heap of thread to the masses of material Seth had brought out earlier. What are you apologizing for? This is great. Seth had just sat there and watched in wonder as thin golden bronze wires came from its mouth. It was very thin, like a thread, but also strong like a wire. He had the perfect idea. Seth thought of the armor made of the thread of Arachne, and remember was Cernobulk had said that this was originally used to make garments for their god. As long as he found a tailor who could weave this thread into cloth, he could get a gambeson made from this, or robes for Finn. It was the best material to wear as the first layer of armor. The Ivysaur's mood lifted, as Seth explained how useful the thread would be for all kinds of things except just melting it down. And you will grow in the future. You might have memories of your ancestors, but you are still a baby. So don't worry too much about the now, he smiled and patted the Ivysaur's round golden head. Looking at it now, one would not expect it to have the potential to grow into a terrifying existence like Cernobulk, or the Holy Beast. But what was he supposed to do until he found a tailor or weaver? After the Ivysaur left to replenish his energy in the sun on the deck, Seth was left with a heap of Ivysaur wool. It had a strength similar to high-quality steel, and a magic conductivity close to mithril. Seth thought of covering steel with a thin layer of it. Seth tried something we would call brazing on a small dagger, but it had a terrible success rate since he had no flux to help the bronze stick properly. After a few fails, he shelved the idea for now. Maybe he could ask a blacksmith, once they reached Aura. Seth had reached Blacksmith, Adept, LV3, when they finally reached Yisavai, where they would have to part from Serena. It was not the first stop since Oricott, but the first big city since then. The ship would stay here for a day, so it was worth a trip. Seth and Finn decided to accompany Serena and take a look at the city. There was already someone at the port waiting for Serena. There was a well-kept man with 3 armored guards. He looked at the picture in his hand, and at the little girl that left the ship with a stranger and ferry. They approached the group of 3. "Hello. Are you Serena? Then you must be the benefactors that saved our young lady," the man gave a trained smile. Serena shrunk back and hid behind Seth. She had grown up as a normal village girl, and didn't know how to deal with these strangers. The man's smile became a little complicated as he crouched down to get on Serena's eye level. "I am Edward, the Chancellor of your father. He asked me to bring you to him safely." The girl looked back and forth between Edward and Seth, unsure of what to do. Seth patted her head. "We will come along if that makes you feel better, okay," he said with a smile. Maybe they could grab a good meal at the noble residence. Also, the quest had not updated yet. Seth wanted to make sure that the quest was completed correctly. It was Edward's feel unsure of what to do but agreed for them to come too. Yisavai was even greater than Oricott, as it was a trade center with various connections via sea routes, the airship and caravans. It was also the only harbor where merchant ships from the Elven Grand Duchy would anchor. It was a shame that they could only stay for a day. The Count of Sexos was a noble with a territory neighboring this massive trade hub. His estate was located in the noble district along with other great and lavish mansions. One could guess how much he profited from his proximity to this city. Serena looked troubled when a big stranger with a magnificently bushy beard and a golden mane like a lioness rushed out from the build and pulled her into a tight embrace. His clothes looked expensive, but not lavish or gaudy like some other clothes Seth had seen on nobles. The fine cloth stretched over well-trained muscles as the Count hugged his daughter. "Ding! You have complete quest, a last request dash. You have received, loyal soul, medium, experience. Intimacy with Count Sexos has risen. I am so glad you are okay. My poor baby." Seth blinked perplexedly. Even Finn was surprised. Serena didn't know how to react and Edward wore a wry smile. The Count really loved his daughter, despite never appearing before her. He had always kept in contact with her mother by exchanging letters. Serena warmed up to him when they talked about her mother, and he explained why he could not be with them. It was the typical excuse that he was not powerful enough to protect them. Seth didn't really listen to that part after the quest had been completed. The Count seemed very sympathetic, especially since he did not stop thanking them. He even gave them 50 gold and invited them to a meal. Serena would be safe if she stayed with this man. They spent the day at the mansion, with Serena and her father, before leaving Yisavai the next morning. Finally, they reached Aura, the great dwarven city at the foot of the mountain range. Almost 4 months for a journey that he had not planned in the first place. The airship had done many stops in between, and Seth had used a chance to actually enjoy this different world. His knowledge of materials had not grown a lot, but his blacksmith, adept, had reached level 4, and he had become accustomed to the system institutes like the auctioneers. But today was the day his stumbling in the darkness would end. The city before them was Aura, a magnificent city, with one half sprawling over a great plain, and growing high into the air with its other half being built into a great cliff wall. The raven-black walls of the city towering over the plain could be seen from a far distance. Sections of the wall were separated by giant statues of dwarven warriors, and watchtowers laced with white and golden ornaments. Behind the black walls was an ocean of buildings growing higher and higher the closer they were to the cliff, with roof shingles in several shades of blue, and their walls ranging from dark gray to white like marble. This was no organically grown village that had grown into a giant city. This was a thoroughly planned and well-constructed metropole. The airport was situated outside the Great Walls, So even the nobles traveling on this cruise had to pass the gates under scrutinizing eyes of the guard and the overwhelming presence of the dwarven stone guardians. It was humbling to stand at the foot of the 30-40-meter tall giants. Even Finn looked up at their hewn faces, slack-jawed before this sight. The 20-meter-high gates of the city, which barely reached the hips of the guardians, were richly covered in decorative fittings. Just the skill that went into these fittings convinced Seth that he had come to the right place. People enter via a smaller gate embedded into the giant gates. Similar to when he became part of the Adventurer Guild, their status was checked to see whether they were wanted criminals before being let in by the watchman. What came before their eyes was a bustling main street that was slowly rising into the distance, all the way up to the cliff where another great gate was situated in the cliff wall, where people would enter the other half of the city. The part where the dwarven population lived in high halls and complexes built directly into the mountains. Other, similar gates led to the expansive networks of mines that pervaded the stone, and led deep into the central mountain range. So far and deep, that even among the dwarfs few had an idea where exactly they led. The main business of the city was obvious in the shops that primarily lined the main street. Blacksmiths, engineers, enchanters, all kinds of weapons and armor shops. Jewelers and gem cutters that sold raw materials and products made from the several rare gems and stones mined deep in the roots of the mountains. Magic and alchemy were also a big part of the scene, as many rare materials came from mountains and the dungeons that grew in the old abandoned mines. Just walking along the street started filling his catalogs with all kinds of entries and blueprints. This was what he had wanted all the time. He looked like a very poor child smiling from ear to ear entering a chocolate factory. Rare materials like fireglass or mithril were easily available here. Although expensive, they were still a lot cheaper than in the auction house. Some vendors even told him that adventurers could find materials like these in the dungeons below the city. And even better ones. Finn watched Seth excitedly go around from shop to shop, speaking with the vendors, looking at materials. Their first goal was, of course, the guild. It was the best place to get information about the city and society. The only dwarf they had ever met was Udrid. The grumpy huntress was the fairy's first dwarf, too. The only thing the outer city of the dwarven metropole lacked was dwarfs. And new enchantments, he could identify most of those he saw in the shops. It was soon revealed why, when they reached the guild. The guild hall in Aura's outer city was a lot smaller than the one in Oricott, because it was actually split into two branches. The whole city was split. The outer city, which was open for all visitors from any race or faction, had a guild branch. And the other one was situated in the dwarven half of the city, the inner city, where only dwarfs and people with their recognition were allowed to enter. This was also the place to go if you wanted to buy dwarven works. All their shops were located there and dwarves only rarely left their subterranean world. Most of the high-ranking adventurers of Aura could be found there too. The dungeons growing within the mines and mountain range were extremely dangerous, with rewards fitting the danger. In the guild, they got a brochure very similar to the one in Oricott. It had a simple map of the city with the locations of the most important facilities, and a catalogue of inns and shops found in the outer city. Since all the dwarfs were hiding in their mountain, Seth needed to find the way in. The receptionist explained to him the 3 ways to get entry permission. The first was to be a B-rank adventurer, which meant that he would need to level up and succeed in the rank-up examination. The second was to increase his reputation in the city, and take a test by a dwarven official. The third was to be invited by a master from the inner city. Masters of their craft had a high standing in dwarven society, and bringing in anyone they liked was just one perk. Not just anyone could waltz into the halls of stone, as the locals liked to call it. They checked in with a medium-sized inn called the Lucky Miner. James, the owner, was a friendly elderly beastman with droopy dog ears. He had been a miner in his youth and experienced a windfall when he found an especially big ingot of mithril, which led to a whole new vein. He used the bonus to open this inn with his family, hence the name. His wife and son were great chefs, and the inn was known for its food. One of the reasons they chose this place. After a good meal they wanted to leave again, but the Ivysaur wished to stay in the room. It wanted to absorb more solar energy, so Seth and Finn left without it. Following the inn was the church. Seth wanted to send a message to Simon that he was still alive and finally reached his destination, after 4 months. The local church greeted him respectfully after affirming that he was an affiliated Orihuma. Sending things with the guild was quite expensive, even letters. Especially across worlds. Sending letters for free was the only free and reliable service he got as a lay follower. A shame he didn't have many friends in other worlds. But they kept in touch with Serena using this system. The girl had managed to reclaim some of her happiness in the time with her father. As Seth started writing his letter for Simon, the priest from Starda, a church employee, suddenly spoke to Finn, who was sitting on his shoulder, and helped him to write the letter, also known as giving him ideas to make fun of Simon. The employee led her away. Seth had long finished the letter when Finn finally returned. Her face was ashen and lacked her usual energetic smile. She looked up and gave a wry smile when she saw Seth's worried expression. Finn is sorry, Seth. Finn, I will have to return home soon. Seth's jaw fell open and he didn't know what to say. My father sent me a letter. He says it's important that I return as soon as possible, and I. She had dropped her cute act. She tried to hold back, but big tears welled up in her dark eyes. She bit down on her trembling lips. Hey. He lifted his hand to, yeah, what? Stroke her. As he stood cluelessly, she rushed into his chest and firmly grabbed onto his shirt. She started sobbing with big tears and snot running down her face, promptly soaking his clothes. Finn does not want to wee-wee. Finn wants to stay with Seth. What? He cupped his hands so the little fairy could sit on his palm, her tiny fist still firmly lodged onto his shirt. Seth felt a tinge of sadness at the thought that he would leave his side. Seth had tasted loneliness. Maybe not as much as others, but enough to fear it. Finn had helped him more than she might have known. After his parents died, Seth had isolated himself, he avoided people. He cut ties. He had not realized it until all the things that kept him occupied were gone. He remembered back in Deltan. There were moments when he sat alone in the dark, staring into the forge, and asking himself why he was even trying so hard. Grinding had been another way to distract himself, but it was not a cure. Traveling with Finn, having a friend. Simply her being there had helped him a lot to cope with everything. He hugged her back tightly. Hey, Finn. This is not a goodbye. It's a see you later. Get it, he said in a steady voice. When your business at home is done, you can come back here. And if you don't come back, then I will come over there. I will travel to the fairy world. As she looked up at Seth's serious face. And no matter how long I have to look, I will find you. This is a promise. He made it sound a lot more like a threat than a genuine promise, but a big smile appeared on Finn's face. She had been worried that she would be bogged down in duties again once she returned. She couldn't help but laugh. Thinking of him being thrown to some random place in the fairy world, and rushing around like a headless chicken trying to find her. It had helped to lift her mood. You better not come looking for Finn. We both know what would happen. You are right. It's a see you later. Don't think you can get rid Finn this easily. Finn will hunt you down. You will never escape. Oh really? Not if I find you first. I will be stuck to you like a leech. No. Finn will be the leech. Finn will be like the thought in the back of your mind. Always there. They kept bickering back and forth about hunting each other down, and that there was no escape. In the end, they could not come up with any more dumb phrases and calmed down. The employee had watched the whole drama in awkward silence. The matter was really important, and the fair folk paid for an express portal. Finn has to leave now. She gave Seth a last hug. Goodbye. Seth held her back. It's a see you later. Don't forget it. She smiled and left with the employee, leaving Seth behind. As he looked at the first friend he had made in a long time leave, a warm caring feeling rose up in him. It's okay. I am still here. It was his connection with his pet, the tiny Ivysaur, that had grown a lot stronger during their journey. It shared a lot of his feeling and understood his current mood. So it reassured him that he was not alone. Yes, he still had a friend with him. And had made several others on his journey, even if they were not here now. Thanks, he said to no one in particular, and left the church. Back on the busy streets of Aura, Seth felt lost. He wandered the streets, just looking around. It was the storefront of a grimy little pub that caught his attention. The withered sign in the shape of a beer mug hung crookedly above the sturdy door, only held by one rusted chain. Warm light fell through the bull glass onto the muddy street. He had entered the slums before he knew it, and even around here it didn't seem like a very reputable establishment. It was perfect to get fucked up. The floors were caked in mud and dirt, but the pub was filled to the brink. All kinds of rough-looking guys and miners filled tables and spaces in between. The air smelled of sweat and cheap beer. Half a pig was roasting over a big fireplace in the corner beside the bar counter. Thick grease was glistening on the meat and dropping into the fire below, adding another savory note to the mix of odors in the room. The place was dirty, smelly, and filled with hairy, grimy guys. It was revolting. It was the place Seth felt he had to be. He squeezed into the mass of bodies and made his way towards the bar. The barkeeper was not someone you wanted to buy food from. His skin was rough and tanned, and his sharp blue eyes did not ask him what he wanted. He threatened Seth not to disturb him by ordering something. Those eyes were directed into the room, while his hand absent-mindedly cleaned a mug with a dirty rag. Give me something mean. Not your looks. Something to drink. The men stared daggers at the chick that dared to disrupt him. Still, he pulled out an unlabeled clear bottle filled with a clear fluid. A small glass was smashed onto the counter before Seth, and left a dent in the aged wood. Or maybe just in the layer of dirt that covered it. The clear liquid filling the small glass had a tint of green, and a tiny black maggot was floating in it. The keeper still kept mum, but he smiled disdainfully at the pup that challenged him. Seth empties the glass in one shot. The drink felt like acid shooting down his throat. He chewed the maggot with his mouth open and swallowed it in spite. Another, he said, and knocked with the glass on the counter. The keep's smile was gone and he refilled the glass. Again, Seth emptied it in one shot. He could feel his health deteriorating, but his HP regeneration covered it thanks to his endurance and the pendant of the nightcrawler. Another. The barkeeper lifted one of his brows and looked at him askant before filling the glass again. This was not a booze anybody took a second shot of. He had seen people going, temporarily, blind after the second glass. What was wrong with this guy? Another. It was the only word the blacksmith kept repeating in the lively atmosphere of the pub. The barkeeper would refill his glass and Seth would empty it again. The cycle kept going until the first bottle was empty. The keeper grunted and left unwillingly to get another bottle. That stuff must taste quite good if you keep drinking it like that. Mind if I join you? A merry voice sounded beside him. Seth looked to the right and his eyes fell onto a small figure. A short beard, a simple slide cap, a worn shirt, and pants with suspender, everything covered in a dark layer of stone and coal dust. A dwarf? A miner just like the other workers in the pub. Do what you like. The dwarf sat down beside him, and also ordered a glass of whatever this terrible booze was. The barkeeper scowled at but put another glass on the counter before filling both glasses. Seth downed the drink in one go. Yuwag, the dwarf beside his started spitting it all over the place as his body revolted in a jolt of self-preservation. What the hell? How can you drink this shit with a straight face? Another, he said and smirked at the dwarf. The barkeeper had actually stopped caring about the crazy person some time ago, and refilled his glass. The dwarf got a different drink but did not leave. On the fifth shot, Seth was already quite drunk when a notification rang in his mind. Ding. Passive skill, poison resistance acquired, thanks to continuous exposure to a weak poison. Seth sighed, the booze had lost its bite. He was already wasted, so he didn't really care that much and took it as a hint to stop there. He knocked on the counter to signal that he wanted to pay. 7 silver, the grumpy barkeeper said in a hoarse voice. They were the first and only words he spoke to Seth. He looked questioning at Seth. The other put 10 silver on the counter. He gestured at the dwarf that had fallen on the counter beside Seth to show that it was to pay his bill too. He had not asked or looked for company tonight, but he still appreciated it. He patted the dwarf's shoulder and left the pub to look for an inn for the rest of the night. The bright light of the morning sun that fell in through the windows woke him up and hurt in his hungover eyes. It was a tiny window, and the light fell into a tiny room right below the roof of an inn. The place was sparsely decorated with the bed he lay in, a cupboard, and a table with a chair. Clothes were randomly spread on the floor. Something soft was pressing against his chest, and his right hand caressed a smooth back when he tried to move. He had an educated guess but was still surprised. He looked down and saw a cute girl with a pair of fluffy ears poking up from her maroon hair. She was snuggled up against him, using his shoulder as a pillow. His touch had woken her up, and now she looked in his face with a big smile. "You are awake," she said, and came up to give him a deep, passionate kiss. Seth had no memory of this girl, but he made sure to use all morning to make a few new ones with her. "Phew, you are a real surprise," she said after getting up. She picked up her things and started to get dressed. Seth stayed in bed and watched the beast girl covering her lithe and well-toned body. She wore a short leather jacket exposing her midriff, knee-high boots, and leather hot pants. "And you are still not satisfied," she commented on his gaze not leaving her body. With an embarrassed cough, Seth also got up to get dressed. He really didn't remember how he met such a beauty and seduced her, but didn't he complain? Or was she a prostitute? Did he have to pay her? As he was hit by conflicting thoughts, she stepped up to him, got on her toes, and gave him another kiss. "This is goodbye, big guy," with her finger tracing his collarbone she added, "If fate is with me, I would love to meet you again." With that, she left before Seth could even say a word. When Seth came back to his senses, he found a stack of silver coins on the table. The girl wasn't the prostitute, he was. He sat down and looked at the stack of 15 silver coins on the table. He got drunk, got laid, he got paid all in one night. Waking up with a beauty in his arms was not bad. Maybe he should quit blacksmithing and become a male prostitute. He would not mind if this was his kind of customers. He shook his head. Although he felt a lot better after a night of debauchery, it was not the life he wanted. He needed to return to his inn. The Ivysaur was probably worried. It had also helped clear his mind. Seth was free to do anything he wanted right now, and what he wanted was to grow his skill. He needed to get into the Dwarven district for this. Seth had no idea how he would grow his reputation and get invited. He could open a shop and hope for the best, or rank up as an adventurer. It was a simple decision, really. He would just do both. It was past noon when he finally returned to the inn. The caterpillar jumped him and flooded him with accusations. It had really worried a lot. Then came the hard conversation, where he had to explain to him that Finn had to return to her people. Unexpectedly, it had weighed a lot more on Seth's mind than on the Ivysaur's. Even so, it sometimes acted childishly. It was actually quite mature when it came to things like this. "So, what do we do now?" the small Ivysaur asked him. Seth explained the situation to it and set off for the Adventurer Guild. On one side he wanted to ask for information on how to open a shop. On the other side, he wanted to know what the requirements were to rank up. And last but not least, he wanted to use the guild for what its primary purpose was, to get a quest and visit dungeons. He was halfway to level 21, and needed another 2 SP to get the next level on Spirit Smithy. It was not far to the guild and they soon arrived. Past noon most of the adventurers had long left the guild building after getting a quest. The receptionist and a few people drinking in the bar were the only ones in the guild. Seth could walk straight to the counter. The receptionist greeted him with a well-trained business smile, although it twitched a little. Seth had not taken a bath after his nocturnal activities, and the receptionist could smell that. Adventurers that came way too late, long after the morning rush, and didn't he even bother to wash up. She was still new, but the training showed its worth. Otherwise, her expression would have been a lot different. "How can I help you?" First Seth asked about the requirements to reach B rank. She was surprised to see that he was a C rank adventurer as a blacksmith that just LV20. But the fact that he was an Orihuma seemed to explain a lot to her. There are 2 ways to become a B rank. The first is to be a reputed adventurer and reach the required level, which is LV50. Of course, we know that depending on class, race, and other circumstances the power of an adventurer can vary, independent from their level. This is why the second option is to take a rank-up exam. An examiner will judge your abilities and personality during a B-rank quest. As long as you pass the exam, you can become a B-rank adventurer. She rattled the explanation off like reading from a textbook. Here is a request formula to take part in the next rank-up exam. It's in 2 weeks. She gave him a piece of paper via the tray. Oh, thanks. Say, if I wanted to open a weapons shop here in the city, where would I have to go? She started to list all kinds of licenses and places he would have to go and get if he wanted to open a shop in the city. It was a huge flood of information that totally intimidated the young blacksmith. What was this? Why was there so much bureaucracy in such a medieval-looking society? She had a smug smile, seeing his stressed expression. They had these people sometimes. New in town, just trying to gain reputation and enter the dwarven city. Without the knowledge of what it all entailed. After dunking Seth into the despair that was future paperwork, she threw him a lifeline. If you only want to gain reputation, so you get access to the dwarven city, you can also simply make a contract with an already existing shop. You become a supplier and other people will take care of the paperwork. And if your products are as amazing as you think they are, you might get invited to enter the city. Seth's eyes shined. Profit without taking care of customers was the best profit. He talked with the receptionist about the different shops that came into question for this kind of arrangement. In the end, he also filled out the request paper to take part in the next exam before leaving. Seth had 2 weeks until the exam and quite a few things to do. As the receptionist had explained, the exam would be a B-rank quest under the guidance of an experienced examiner. A B-rank quest could easily take several weeks on its own. He would have to make preparations for his journey and look for a shop to sell his weapons. He still had a few leftovers that he did not sell via the auction house yet. He had actually made quite a sum with the uncommon snake weapons, selling them for 4 to 6 gold coins apiece. They had become very popular after he had gotten his hands on a poison enchantment during one of their stops. There was another thing they had wanted to do for a long time, but didn't he get to do during the journey. It was to test the Ivysaur's performance in battle. The caterpillar looked like a very cute pet, but it had the skills and memories of an extremely powerful species. It had grown a lot in the last weeks, from a plushie to the size of a hug pillow. Seth planned to enter a low-level dungeon to see what skills the Ivysaur could use for now and increase its level for the upcoming exam. On another note, he could not forget the things he needed himself. There was the need to find a weaver or tailor to make cloth from the Ivysaur's thread. The little guy had made quite a lot of it in the weeks of their journey. He wanted to make padded cloth armor, a gambeson, to wear below his new armor. New armor? Yes. It was a full set of snake armor. Seth had used almost 25 snake rips and some of the juvenile snake leather to make a lamellar armor and fitting shoulder guards, bracers, and greaves. The lamellar armor was made up of overlapping plates of snake bone held together by strips of leather. The other parts were technically snake leather armor reinforced with bone plates. He lacked the soles to give the armor any great properties, but they sported a natural resistance against poison and corrosion. The durability was a lot better after forging them with Sharon's obel when compared to parts ground into shape. He had not touched the fireglass or remaining dark steel for this armor because he was still lacking in some areas. His end goal was to make a fireproof armor after all. He didn't want to experience the embarrassment of being seen naked after using his fire again. There was a small episode where the receptionist lady that had found him after dying in Zeke's dungeon could not look him in the eyes for the remaining time of his stay. She would blush furiously and look away any time they entered the guild. Anyways, because of this armor, he felt okay to face an old enemy. Water. It was time he followed the ice guy cliché and entered the sewer dungeon. The Ivysaur's attack options were mostly magic, so it would be easy to farm weak monsters like slimes and sewer rats. Or a number of dungeons growing in its extensive sewer system. Aura's sewer system was also quite peculiar in that it shared the space below the city with some subterranean city districts. As one would expect from a dwarven city, even the part built for the humans had roots that reached deep into the earth. The underground was mostly an imitation of the districts above, but with cheaper rents and prices. Below the commercial district, for example, were 3 more layers filled with shops, underground bazaars, and the black market at the deepest level. The underground districts made a smooth transition into the sewer system below the better residential areas. This came in handy as Seth could cross the commercial district and take a look at the shops the guild receptionist had told him about. Seth should have known it, but the shop owners shamelessly abused their status. It was no secret that many people preferred to dodge the paperwork and costs of an own shop when all they wanted was an invitation to enter the dwarven district. As such, to commission the selling of products, they quoted rates that were even worse than simply selling the item to them. Splitting the money 60:40 or even 70:30, just to mention the blacksmith's name when the item was sold, was a joke. Just because Seth had money, didn't mean he would ignore getting ripped off. No, especially because he had money, opening a shop seemed more feasible. Another thing Seth was unable to deal with was the merchant's arrogance. They dared to act as if they did the people they ripped off a favor. It was late afternoon when he finished visiting all the shops recommended. None of them were any good. Even those with better rates had this pretentious demeanor Seth just could not stomach. He shook his head to clear his mind. It was already getting late now, and he wanted to give the dungeon a visit. There were many staircases located in the district that led to the underground passages below. Seth just needed to enter the first underground floor of the shopping district and follow the signs. This underground floor was a lot cleaner and appealing than Seth had thought. Except for the fantasy atmosphere created by the kinds of shops, products, and people of different races filling this subterranean world, it could have been a modern shopping arcade. The sewer dungeon was separated by a big door covered in iron plates. There were 2 guards at the door, checking people's adventurer IDs. When the door opened, Seth could hear the hiss of air, as if the door was an airtight seal. It had to be, because the smell of the sewer that could not be smelled until now, came over him like a wave and hit him like a wall. If this door was not airtight, the whole place would smell of this. Seth entered before he could change his mind, but he swore that this was the first and last time. Once the door closed behind him, he summoned the Ivysaur from the pet space. A shiver ran through its body, and it shook its head around. Kyurkyu. I will only enter this once. We are not doing this again. They were in tacit agreement to never enter a sewer again after this was over. The Ivysaur crawled in front, as it would be the main firepower during the dungeon dive. When the 2 fought together, the experience was evenly split between owner and pet, but only if both did damage to the target. Although this was only to test its skills in a safe environment, the Ivysaur could also level up a little in this place. The monsters down here consisted mostly of different kinds of rats, slimes, and other critters eating the trash down here. But one should not underestimate these monsters. The slimes, for example, were not the nice round blobs who did nothing but bounce around and digest stuff. They tended to stick to either the ceiling or hide in the water. They would shoot hardened tendrils like spikes out from their body to skewer their prey. And their prey ranged from normal size to giant rats that reached Seth up to the knee, like a small dog. He kept his distance from those, as their yellowish teeth were on crotch level if they stood upright, like a small dog's. Other critters down here consisted of big bugs, spiders, and something like a big raccoon. They had patchy hair, and were partly bald as if they had mange. With an average level of 7, these were the strongest mobs in the sewers. The skill set of a young Ivysaur consisted mostly of elementary light magic and psychokinesis. As such, it waltzed through the dungeon by either shooting low-level rats and critters with pebbles or short bolts of light, like a laser. Seth followed it with his new main weapon held in his hand, ready to step in. It was a spear he made from the piece of ironwood and the uncommon drake tooth had he found all the way back in the Ivysaur Guild branch. Thanks to Sharon S. Obel, he was not restricted by the original form of the material anymore, which made it possible to forge the shaft from the piece of wood. The drake tooth shared the penetrative properties expected of the dragon race's teeth, and was ideally suited to be a spear tip. The spear was infused with the loyal soul, rare, and had gotten a rare rating thanks to this. The enchantment powered by the soul gave the weapon another damage boost. Loyal spear. Rare. Damage, 420. Durability, 2300. 1. Spear cannot be lost. 2. Double the damage on stab attacks. 3. The spear is protective of its owner, and will help in defending against attacks. A remarkable weapon made by an aspiring blacksmith. The weapon possesses the will to protect the owner. Not the best suited property for a weapon. It shows an increased performance thanks to special treatment. Usage condition, Seth Smith. Seth knew what the description meant. The loyal soul would have been more suited for armor, but he had decided on a better weapon at that time. Seth was sure that at some point in the future he would be able to retrieve souls from items. It was a feeling he had gotten when he experimented with the souls. Before he quenched an item in the water of Styx, he had felt like he could separate the soul from the unfinished item using soul capture. It was just so hard to level this skill. Seth guessed that the skill leveled up by collecting souls, but souls had a low drop chance. Normally. To his surprise, the drop chance of soul had drastically increased when the Ivysaur killed a prey. Instead of being 10% or lower as Seth had experienced it until now, it came close to 30% with the Ivysaur killing them. Maybe it had something to do with the Ivysaur's unique energy. Or because they were a race directly created by a god. He didn't know, but he happily collected the fruits of this circumstance. In the evening they finally left the smelly dungeon. Unfortunately, the smell had already stuck their bodies. A rigorous bath was desperately needed. They returned directly to their inn to get exactly that. At least this torture was not for naught. The Ivysaur had reached a proud LV6, and its magic improved. It was now able to even kill those LV7 raccoons, and learned how to create a light shield and a basic healing spell. It still lacked Finesse Iron Fist, but it might be able to take on the role of the healer very soon. Its skills were very close to what Seth would call a priest, but when he thought of the size it could reach, an Ivysaur was probably closer to a paladin or a monk if it had a class. If only it could learn some life magic, it would be very handy if it was able to use magic to clean off the terrible smell. Seth was seriously considering buying some skill books for life magic and learning it. Only now did he understand the importance of such skills. The monsters of this dungeon had no special materials. Entering the dungeon and killing monsters was just a generic task to keep the sewers clean. The pay for the task was pitiful, but Seth didn't say no to money for something he did anyway. Especially since he managed to collect almost 30 small souls from the Ivysaur's massacre. Seth managed to fuse them into 2 medium-sized souls, and used them on the one weapon he was sure he would not change any time soon. Vengeful Hunter Bow. Unique. Damage, 200. Durability, 1300. 1. Arrows shot with this bow show malice, and will correct their trajectory to hit vital points. 2. Inflicted wounds will hurt more, heal worse and get infected. A frightening weapon made by an aspiring blacksmith. A bow possessed by a strong malicious will to hurt its benefactor's enemies. Usage condition, Seth Smith. The stats had increased again, and this time the chance for the wound to become infected became a guarantee. This became a really terrifying option. Even if someone or something managed to escape, healing was impeded and infection guaranteed. His targets might die a slow and painful death long after they escaped from him. If he was an archer, he would become the terror of the battlefield with skills like multi-shot. And like this, their first day without their tiny energy bundle fin ended. Seth hugged the Ivysaur tightly, as they both fell asleep thinking about their missing friend. The next days were uneventful. The Ivysaur would wake Seth early in the morning, and they would go to stuff themselves with food. The caterpillar tried hard to keep up with Seth's voracious appetite, but could not eat several times its own body mass, unlike a certain fairy. They spend these days farming souls and experience in the low-level dungeons. The not-so-smelly ones. This also gave Seth the chance to explore the different kinds of dungeons. Generally, there were those that grew in already existing structures like the sewer, a tomb, or an actual dungeon. But there were also those that would grow as an own structure. There was a tower in Aura that had 25 floors above, and an unknown number of floors below ground. This was the place they spend most of their time in these days. The most interesting ones were dungeons that existed as a portal that led to space bubbles. They could randomly appear independent from the surrounding. They were the most dangerous and unpredictable kind of dungeons. Sometimes they would lead to a completely different environment, or to something like a parallel version of the real surroundings. One would know where they led before they were explored, and they had no divisions when it came to levels. If you randomly entered one such dungeon, you could end up in a forest with mostly harmless animals and suddenly get killed by a dragon coming by. After diligently farming all kinds of monsters in the low-level areas like goblins, kobolds, orcs, wolves and such, the Ivysaur reached LV10. QQO. I think I am ready to choose my name. It suddenly said one evening after they left the tower. The Ivysaur had explained it to him and Finn back then. It was a tradition that an Ivysaur was not given a name by its parents. It would choose a name based on its racial memories and experiences, once it deemed itself ready. QA. From now on, the great me shall be known by the name of Puffles the Mighty. Puffles the Mighty. Are you sure about Puffles the Mighty? You keep forgetting it. It's Puffles the Mighty. I will call you Puff. Puffles the Mighty. Puff. Puffles. Puff. Q. With a sad noise, it acquiesced to be called Puff from now on. Now Puffles was strong enough to accompany Seth into the dungeon with higher levels so that Seth could use the second week before the exam to strengthen himself. But first came a break to celebrate Puffles finally having a name. They really had enough from the lunch boxes they ate during the dungeon dives. Although they were no gourmets, they still grew to like the higher cuisine in their time on the airship. They washed up at the inn and left to celebrate. Seth wore his best set of clothes, one he had bought when he went to find a tailor to make the Ivysaur cloth. The style and aura was different from what he had seen in the other cities they had visited. The clothing here was high quality, but of simple yet elegant design. It lacked the gaudy decorations and colors of noble fashion he knew. He was told that it was the dwarven influence. While dwarfs were known for their intricate works when it came to masonry, weaponry, and jewelry, their taste for fashion tended to prefer simple and practical attire. As such, Seth wore a simple black coat, trousers, knee-high boots, and a white shirt. All of them were rated uncommon, and had cost Seth a few gold coins. Only those knowledgeable in the subject would be able to judge the quality of these clothes, but their stats were almost as good as common leather armor. Their aim today was a high-rated restaurant from the guild's booklet. The dining room was split into several floors with galleries like a theater. Normal people would eat on the ground floor, while higher up were private rooms and suites for special guests. They had no reservation, but money rules. The floor before them was filled with tables, and interestingly enough, Seth was not the only one with a pet here. Restaurants often forbade the guests to bring out their pets, but this was one of the rare exceptions. An already elegant and greatly decorated room was enhanced by the sight of all kinds of magical beasts sitting beside their owners. Ladies in expensive dresses with exotic magical birds. Burly men in evening attire accompanied by wolves, dogs, there was even a lion. Based on their pets, one could also recognize the adventurers among them. About half of the guests had pets fit for battle. This meant this restaurant was well frequented by high-level adventurers. Only high-rank adventurers made enough money to dine in a place like this. Seth only noticed these things on the side, as he waited for their meal. He had ordered the whole menu twice. Tonight, they would eat until their bellies exploded. Waiters came with all kinds of dishes, making Seth think he was sitting at the wishing table. Filling the table were several kinds of meat like roasted birds, a giant steak, the obligatory pyramid of anime-style meat with a bone in it. But also a soup with colorful vegetables, bread, cake, and something that could have been pizza. For drinking, there was wine, but also different exotic fruit juices that Seth could not identify but tasted great. As they were in the middle of decimation their meal, suddenly 2 elbows rested on his shoulders and chin on his head. "Nya, who would have thought I would see you again in such a place," said a teasing voice from above. He looked up into the green eyes of a cat beastman with maroon-colored hair and fluffy cat ears. His sugar mommy. The girl he had spent a nice morning with was standing behind him. She wore a long wine-red evening dress that fit well to her tan skin color, and fit even better to her lithe figure. Behind her were 3 more people. A beastman with similar ears and eye color to the girl. He was tall, attractive, and looked well-trained. Her boyfriend. Maybe her brother. His expression looked complicated. A guy even taller, definitely above 2 m, and easily the width of 3 people. His face looked like he inherited the blood of an ogre, and his suit threatened to rip if he just barely flexed his bulging muscles. The third person was a girl with short black hair and a lean, agile figure. The nice way to say that she was flat as a board, and the tight blue evening dress didn't do her a big favor there. She had a calm expression and her ears were slightly pointy. An elf. No, Seth had seen some elves on his journey, their ears were longer and pointier, so maybe a half-elf. Seth swallowed what he had in his mouth. The girl that suddenly appeared acted like nothing was wrong. Seth on the other hand felt rather awkward. A girl he did not remember the name of, from a one-night stand he was paid for, suddenly appeared when he was eating in a fancy restaurant and talked to him. It was an understatement to say that he did not know how to react. "It must be fate," she said, and joined them at his table as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Are you here to celebrate, too?" "Where's your party?" she asked, stuffing herself with Seth's food. "Ah, yes. Celebrating, but I have no party." Her question had broken his stupor, though his answer was still delayed. He thought of Finn and felt a light pain in his heart. The Ivysaur this and jumped in to distract him. "Q. I am here. Don't forget the mighty me. Stop this insolent female from eating my food. Oh my gosh. Is this your pet? It's so cute," she called out. She had not noticed Puff before, but now her eyes fell on a new target. With a jump, she was already beside Puff and hugged him like a plushie. Tightly. Her arms squishing the Ivysaur like a vice. "Q cured. No. Get this female off of me. I am suffocating. Could you please let go of him? Puff does not like being hugged by strangers." She looked up with a greatly disappointed expression but did not let go. It was then that finally one of her party stepped in. It was the handsome beastman with long hair. "Mina. Stop bothering people. Help." He gave Seth an apologetic smile. "I am really sorry for my sister's behavior." She normally isn't like this. Mina. Let go of the caterpillar already. Its face is already turning blue. Mina finally noticed that her tough love was hurting the object of her affection, and let the poor Puffles go. Quickly it scuttled away and hid from her behind Seth's chair, making her look even sadder. But she didn't go back to her party and sat down at his table instead. She's evil and strong. We have to be careful. I am Mike. Again, I am really sorry to disturb you. We came here after finally finishing a long quest, but for some reason, our table was double booked. We were talking to the receptionist when she suddenly ran off. He shot a scolding look at Mina that made her shrink away. Come on, Mina. Stop bothering strangers and dash. But I know him, she suddenly broke out. She wouldn't just bother any stranger. Just the special ones. She looked at Seth with big round eyes, hoping he would throw her a lifeline. Seth was at a loss. Were they more than strangers? They had sex, sure, but he didn't even remember her name. Seth was still pondering when the conversation took its turn to the worse. And how do you dash? Don't tell me he is one of your affairs, again. It was a cold that suddenly cut in. The girl with pointy ears finally decided to speak. Both Seth and Mina blushed. Mike could help but facepalm, seeing their reaction. Not again. His sister had a voracious appetite when it came to men. Because of her increased stats and stamina as a beastman, there were few guys who survived their time with her unscathed. Why, I made sure to leave money for treatment this time. He can be holding a grudge. Right? You are not holding a grudge against me, right? Her eyes begged him to say something. You did what? This time his was her brother, and the girl screaming in sync. Her teammate's reaction made her realize that leaving money for treatment after having sex might not be the right move if you accidentally broke someone's hip or worse. It could even offend people to be treated like a prostitute. She had not paid him for the sex but to get medical treatment. He had tried to follow their bickering up to this point. Now he couldn't help but laugh. These people were worried that he held a grudge for having sex with a cute beast girl. Mina, who had acted so carefree before, was now close to tears as her big brother scolded her. It was a great time for a little prank. He stood up and, bedding his chin on her head, he embraced her from behind. Similar to how she had greeted him. And he played at the few words he still remembered from that morning. You know. Fate made us meet again. And I am still not satisfied. He hugged her tightly against his chest. He could see her ear perk up in surprise. Her brother's jaw fell wide open, the girl was stumped, and even the big guy's eyes bulged in surprise. Ha! You met an even bigger pervert than yourself this time. The cold girl suddenly broke out into laughter. Her brother was still petrified from seeing someone acting like this to his cute innocent sister. He knew what she was up to, but she would always be his cute innocent little sister. Mina's fluffy cat ears lay low, and when Seth looked down, he saw her face becoming red as a tomato. Whoa, what are you doing? She shrieked and got out of his embrace. He smiled mischievously. But his smile soon vanished. Ding. Title: Survivalist Deviant, has ranked up to Survivalist Deviant LV2. You need 20% less water, food, and stamina outdoors, when you are naked in a group of at least 2. This would be a great title to have as a human ancestor living as a tribe somewhere in the plains. It was a shame Seth did not have the habit to travel with a group of naked people. Seeing his sister act all embarrassed calmed down Mike's mind a lot. At least she had the basic decency not to act naughty in public, or at least not in front of him. Though their first meeting was awkward, Seth's joke lightened the mood. Against Puff's protests, he invited them to sit down at his table. However, Puffles the Mighty was immediately appeased when the adventurers ordered even more food and shared it with him. Mike had finally time to properly introduce his party. They were a C-rank party called Yule Cat's Fur, and they had just returned from a quest that had taken almost a week. The two cat tribe siblings were Mike and Mina. The big guy who resembled an ogre was called Bulko, and actually had 1/4 giant blood. And as Seth had already guessed, Lixus, the girl with the pointy ears and short dark hair, was a half-elf. While even the solemn Bulko talked 1 or 2 words, Mina had become really shy, and would avoid his eyes every time he looked at her. As they were all C-rank adventurers, their talk inevitably came to the exam that would be held in a week. They had originally not planned to take part in the next exam, but their last quest was quite successful. The reputation had grown and they leveled up, so they decided to take part, too. You are a C-ranked solo adventurer as a blacksmith. Mike had a surprised look. Normally crafting classes lacked the offensive skills to get far as an adventurer. You have to be strong then. Maybe you could join us for the exam. We could use another frontline attacker. Mike offered with a smile. Mike himself was a swordsman and played the part of a damage dealer. Mina was an assassin and Lixus was a sorceress. The surprising one was Bulko. With his giant build and muscular arms, he was a priest. A pure priest for heals and buffs. Bulko had a whole origin story of his own. One where he started off as a very violent youth. He used to always use force to get what he wants. This was until he almost killed a priest that tried to stop him. He was no murderer, but in his rage had almost become one. Instead of handing him over to the guards, the priest taught him his ways and Bulko changed his class, swearing to never use violence again. Of course, none of them knew how deep the silent giant really was. He never bothered telling anyone. Seth easily agreed. He didn't mind finding new friends, and it definitely would not hurt to know some of the people beforehand. The exam was a joint quest after all. Another bonus was that they could use the following week to train in the dungeon together. With an actual party, Seth and Puffles would be able to visit hunting ground with higher levels safely. As a proper C-rank party, the members of Yulecat's Fur had an average level of 40. This meant Seth could safely enter LV40 hunting grounds. With his level being 20, he would still get more experience like this, even with the experience being shared among more members. I am staying at the Lucky Miner. They had just finished their meal, with everyone being close to falling into a food coma. Before they left and split up again, the conversation led to their plans for tomorrow, where to meet. As Seth was still new to Aura, he suggested meeting at the inn he was staying at. The Lucky Miner. Isn't that the expensive inn at the Elven Square? Lixus exclaimed. She had a rather cold attitude until now, but it suddenly changed now. Expensive? Well, it's not cheap. But I would not call it expensive. Seth pondered. The night at the Lucky Miner cost 10 silver coins. That included 3 tasty meals and a private bathroom. Seth didn't perceive it as expensive. But Seth was rich, how would he know what the poor deem expensive? Lixus' eyes became gold doubloons. For C-rank adventurers like them, 10 silver for a single day was very expensive. A normal citizen would think adventurers made loads of money with their quests and in the dungeons, but they also had huge expenditures. They did not just need to buy food, they also paid for a place to stay, weapons, armor, and to maintain them. They also had to pay a lot of money for single-use items like potions. In the end, unless you became a successful B-rank adventurer, 10 silver for one night was a huge expenditure. And Lixus' new friend just talked about it like it was nothing. The shine of money had thawed the cold beauty's attitude. They agreed to meet in front of the Lucky Miner on the morning of the next day and split up. Seth held back Mina before she could leave completely. Hey! I meant what I said earlier. Would you maybe like to accompany me to my inn? He whispered in her ear. She blushed a little and pondered and then made a slightly complicated expression. Not tonight. Maybe tomorrow. She gave him a teasing smile and ran off after her brother. Seth shrugged and left, with the Ivysaur back in the pet space. The next morning was warm and bright. Seth and Puff and a good breakfast before waiting for the party outside the inn. Today they planned to enter the tower's 6th floor that held monsters up to level 35. With Yule Cat's fur having an average level of 40, they would have some leeway on this floor. Just enough to train and get used to fighting alongside a new member. Soon Bulko and Lixus came into view, while Mina and Mike stayed at the other side of the street, keeping their distance to the inn. "Hey Seth," the elvish girl greeted him excitedly. She really became a lot nicer after knowing he had money. Bulko only gave him a nod as a greeting. "Good morning you two. What's up with the kiddies?" Seth looked at the siblings who looked almost uncomfortable. "They are kind of out of sorts with the owners." Oh, well. Let us leave then." Was the thing between cats and dogs also a thing between beastmen of the cat and dog tribe? They were about to leave when a shout disturbed the calm morning air. "You unfilial children. Don't think I can recognize your teammates? I am not so blind as to not see you over there." James the inn's owner had rushed out onto the street, and was furiously shouting at the cat siblings. Mina and Mike looked conflicted and remorseful. The grown adventurer had turned back to little children being scolded by their father. "I promised your father to take care of you. We raised you as our own children and you suddenly run off to become adventurers. 3 years. Not coming back for 3 years. If Sean did not visit the guild once in a while you could have been dead, without us even knowing. Do you even know how worried I and your mother were?" With this he hugged the two siblings who had their stares fixed to the ground in shame. He hugged them tightly and tears ran down his cheeks. What had Seth stumbled into here? A full-blown soap opera. James had pretty much explained the whole plot. He and his wife had promised one of his former colleagues to take care of his children when he was in the mines. Their mother had died during the winter a year earlier. He died during a mine collapse, leaving the 2 children to James and his wife. They raised the 2 like their own children, but the 2 were adventurous and reckless, which led to them running away and becoming adventurers, a dangerous job their adoptive parents would not have accepted. They missed their parents but were also too afraid to come back and be scolded. That's why they had avoided the inn for 3 whole years, never even getting close. They had not known that their parents had actually kept an eye on their career and had become proud of them. It was quite the heartwarming reunion and stuff like that, but Seth was glad when they could finally set off for their dungeon dive. The walk to the tower was not long, and they soon stood in the entrance hall where you entered the floors. The tower had a teleportation formation, where you could travel to any floor you had visited before. Seth had not been to the 6th floor before, but as long as he was in Mina's party he could hitch a ride to the floor with them. But before they entered the dungeon everyone wore and checked their equipment. The team's eyes bulged when they saw Seth wearing a high-quality armor set and spear. They could not know the exact rating of the items, but they could tell that they were definitely not ordinary. Seth understood their reaction when he checked their equipment with blacksmith's eyes. Except for Mike's sword and Lix's staff who were rated uncommon, they wore only common equipment. Only Mina daggers had a basic enchantment. This was actually very reassuring. It meant they had gotten where they were with their own skills. This didn't change the fact that all of them were marveled at Seth's equipment. "Oh wow. How much did you pay for this?" Lixus asked with sparkly eyes. "A lot of time. I made them myself after all," he answered with a laugh. "You made these?" Mina exclaimed and suddenly clung to him. "You wouldn't possibly have a pair of daggers for your girlfriend, right?" "Shameless," said the half-elvish girl that stayed clinging to his arm. Seth wrapped his arm around Mina's waist and got really close to her. "I have nothing for free. Not even for my girlfriend," he whispered in her ear. "But cheapskate. You are no fun," she said and got away from him. The greedy cold beauty also let go of him after knowing that he would not gift them awesome stuff. Before they entered the floor, Bulko cast group buffs on them all, increasing their defense and damage by 15%. Buffed up, they entered the teleportation formation. This place was very different from the floors he had visited before with Puffles. The floors before always looked like human-made structures. The typical dungeons with long maze-like floors and rooms. But this floor was like a small world. Like the portal dungeons that led to a space bubble. They stood in a dark forest with a dim light shining down from the sky. The trees here were colored in shades from black to purple with gray to pale rose-colored moss, and lichen growing on and hanging from them. The leaves were serrated and ranged from black to dark blue. There was no shrubbery and the ground was just wet dark earth. A cold wind was blowing through the forest and howling through the branches above them. Their breath hung like a white fog in front of their faces. "Get information," Mike said, and everyone formed a loose circle around Lixus and Bulko, he casters. Mike and Bulko had also summoned their pets. One was an armored wolf, which was a monster that looked like a mix of wolf and armadillo. The other was a great snapper, which was a very big and more agile version of a snapping turtle. Both had a balanced attack and defense to reinforce the front line. Puffles, the mighty, took his place in the center, beside the casters. The monsters that were supposed to appear on this floor were types of demonic insects. Seth had not met any demons or demonic creatures yet. But they were a thing in the Pathwork. One of the few factions that not just used the Pathwork, but was able to hijack other worlds on their own. Be careful. These things could hide in any and every shadow around here. There are a lot of shadows. Yep. They slowly walked along a rough path. It was only distinguishable because the surrounding trees had a regular distance between them, forming this way. His feet slightly sank into the soft dark earth of the 6th floor. The floor was dark, but thanks to his pendant he saw everything clearly. Still, it was Mina that was the first to find a monster. With a shadow step, she had vanished from their formation. With a shout, a big spider with spindly legs and a big bulbous but fell on the path. It was black with purple markings and had big wound bleeding with yellowish clear blood on its behind. Mina had brought it into the open with an backstab attack. The monster turned towards them and hissed at their group, spitting fluid in their direction. Before it could hit anyone, Bulko, the giant priest, had already cast a shield to block the attack. Mike had already sliced the creepy crawly apart before Seth could even react. Ding! Woodland Spider LV31 has been killed. You have earned experience. It was over before he could even use observation on the creature. He had gained 1% experience without doing anything. He would have gained more if he did it alone, but he wasn't even sure he could have dealt with this beast on his own. The party had wordlessly synchronized their actions and showed their splendid teamwork. Seth was impressed by their fast reaction and resolved himself to work hard in the future. If he wanted to survive back home, he needed to learn to deal with such situations. Mina, you loot it. Yeah. Mina had to loot all the corpses since she was the party's lucky hand with 33 points in luck. They kept going, searching for the right way. These planes were fundamentally different from normal dungeons, where one could either go back or needed to clear the dungeon to escape. The dungeons that resembled tiny dimensions had the core hidden somewhere in the landscape. You could only clear them by finding the dungeon core or killing all the monsters. Of course, there were also special circumstances. Some dungeons could also be cleared with a quest, and you could always use an escape scroll. But those were rare and expensive. In the tower, each floor was like a separate dungeon, and one needed to clear it to climb to the next floor. Obviously, the dungeon core of a floor was not the dungeon core of the tower, but simply the power center of the floor. Seth got his chance to shine soon enough. They had entered a clearing when a great group of centipedes silently tunneled out from the ground in the darkness surrounding them. This time he was the first to react since he could clearly see them in the dark. With a shout, he swung the spear. The sharp tip easily mowed down the centipedes like grass. They were about the length and thickness of an arm with thumb-sized pincers. Ding! You have killed demonic scuttler LV31-. Experience gained. Ding! You have killed demonic scuttler LV33-. Experience gained. Ding. You have killed demonic scuttler LV31-. Experience gained. He hit 3 with 1 strike. Alarmed by Seth's shout, Bulko cast a greater light to illuminate the whole clearing. Promptly the rest of the party started to fight the roughly 20 centipedes surrounding them. Ding. Demonic scuttler LV32 has been killed. You have earned experience. Ding. Demonic scuttler LV33 has been killed. You have earned experience. Ding. You have leveled up. You are now LV21. The monsters were no problem for the LV40 party, and they soon cleared away all monsters. They killed the second to last centipede and Seth finally leveled up. Just one more level and Seth would have enough skill points to level up Spirit Smithy. He had gained 9 attribute points and used them to smoothen his attributes. He brought strength and dexterity from 63 to 65, agility from 38 to 40, and put the remaining 3 into intelligence, bringing it to 31. After they looted all the mobs and Bulko recast the buffs, they kept going. Mike's party knew this floor already, so they were aiming for the dungeon core. After level up, he only got about 1% experience for the mobs on this floor. They met some more insect-type demons on the way, but it was barely enough for Seth to get halfway to LV22. But leveling up had not been the goal to begin with. When they finally reached the dungeon core, Seth and the party had gotten a feel for each other's skills and how to work together. When they touched the core, they got the option to either go back to the lobby or proceed to the next floor. As the party leader, Mike decided that it was enough for today, and they left the tower. It was late afternoon when they stepped out of the dungeon. Seth invited them for food at the Lucky Miner. After having reconciled with their parents, the 2 siblings and the rest of the party gladly agreed. At the inn, they talked about their plans for tomorrow over a meal. Mina and Mike spent the evening with their parents while the other 2 left. Seth had waited for this. He was not done for the day. It was just another 50% until the next level, and he didn't think it would take very long to farm it alone. As such, he decided to visit another dungeon with Puffles as the sun started to set. Their destination was Aura's graveyard. Undead dungeons were the kind of dungeons Seth found himself always returning to. He had gotten used to the gruesome looks of skeletons and zombies. The dungeon was supposed to be an old crypt that was known to spawn undead up to LV20. They shouldn't be a problem for Seth and Puffles, who also leveled up quite a bit in their last dungeon dive. The Ivysaur was now a proud LV16. He had no attribute points, but his stats naturally grew, increasing his defense, endurance, and mana by a lot. A cold fog covered the nightly graveyard, and was dipped in an alien light by the colorful moons of this world. The graveyard itself was well kept and lacked a creepy and terrifying atmosphere. It was filled with an array of beautiful and lifelike statues displaying the great skill of the town masons. Seth didn't really know the rights of this world, but people who could afford such tombstones must have been wealthy. The entrance to the dungeon attracted negative attention, compared to the neat surroundings. It was an old and weathered mausoleum. Some bronze letters once spelled the family name of the people resting here, but many were missing, leaving the name unreadable. The hinges were so rusted that the rotten door almost crumbled in his hand before opening with an unpleasant creaking. Contrary to expectations, there was no room with nameplates or niches for coffins behind the brittle doors, but a big staircase directly leading down into the darkness. Puffles cast the buffs he learned after leveling up, increasing their defense, attack, and stamina by 5%. They entered the stairs and the door smashed close behind them. Slowly they descended the stairs. They kept descending. The stairs were really long. Finally, they reached a floor. Was this what a crypt looked like? It reminded Seth more of catacombs. Long narrow corridors hewed into the stone with recesses for coffins. After setting off a flame trap by opening one of them, Seth decided to not touch them anymore. He didn't get hurt, but the durability of his armor had decreased a little. Soon opening in the walls started to appear, leading to small barren rooms that held stone caskets. This time Seth could not help himself. He shoved off one of the covers using his spear, evading a volley of poison arrows this way. Inside was a roughly humanoid skeleton, and nothing more. It really wasn't worth the effort. As he was occupied with the casket before him, suddenly the cover of another one to the side exploded upwards and a pale creature lunged at him. Sharp claws aimed for his face, but he blocked them with his arm guards, only to take a hit in the gut. He felt the power penetrate through the lamella of his armor. How was it this strong? He shoved the heavy attacker away with the spear shaft to gain distance and ready his weapon. It had surprised him, but he was able to deal with it thanks to calm reaction. Ghoul LV-21. Observation did its job and told him that the pale roughly humanoid creature before him was in fact not a vampire, as Seth had judged because of the appearance, but a ghoul. It had razor-sharp fangs and claws like hunting knives. These claws had left some marks on the bone plates of his armor, but now that Seth was ready, he did not give it a chance to get past the spear tip. When it attempted to slap the spear aside and rush at him, the spear tip evaded the hit and thrust deep into the creature's chest. It didn't die but let out a blood-curdling scream. Impaled on the spear, it caught onto the shaft and didn't let go. At this moment the sound of stones breaking and rubble falling echoed through the corridor outside, and he heard fast steps approach shortly after. Was that a call for help? Let go. Seth had not wanted to use it, because it could damage the loot, but this was not the time for it. He tightened his grip and a tongue of flames shot along his spear and directly into the monster's chest. Like other undead before, it shrieked in pain and let go of the spear. Seth used the chance to pull the spear out and thrust again, this time into the ghoul's face. Ding! You have killed Ghoul LV-21. Experience gained. Puffles had cast a barrier to keep the horde outside. Seth turned to the entrance of the room. The corridor was filled with ghouls. A horde of ghouls, humanoid creatures with hunched backs and long sharp claws, was banging onto the thin light membrane Puffles had summoned on the door. While the barrier was still holding, Seth decided to chuck his throwing knives into the crowd. It was simply faster than using his bow to shoot them in close range. But the ghouls' reactions were unbelievably fast, and while some evaded his attack, one even caught the throwing knife with its mouth and bit it into pieces. His attacks did some damage when he hit. Many among the group of ghouls were bleeding in several places when the barrier started giving in. He readied his spear as the barrier started to get covered in cracks, and Puffles positioned himself in the rear to support Seth with attack magic. The barrier finally broke, and the horde tried to rush into the room. Seth did not shy away from the entrance but used it as a bottleneck. With Puffles shoot light arrows at the ghouls in the back, Seth was able to fight the creatures one by one and kept aiming at their heads, as this had worked on the last one. Under Seth's relentless thrusts, and the Ivysaur's cover fire, the undead fell one by one. He used the soul fire sparingly to drive back the ghouls if they threatened to overwhelm them. Ding! Skill, Weapon Mastery LV6 has become Weapon Mastery LV7. It was an unprecedented struggle Seth had not expected. Once 15 ghoul corpses covered the floor, silence finally returned to the dungeon. Fatigued, he sat on the ground with his back against a destroyed stone casket. Just a little more, Seth was really close to level up. It made this struggle worth it. Not really. Even if he could revive at the guild, being ripped apart by ghouls was not his number one choice of death. He stayed put until his breathing returned to normal, and his HP had more or less recovered. The increased health regeneration of his pendant was a great help. Seth had been really surprised by the strength of these undead. The young man realized that he couldn't be careless just because his stats and items were overpowered. After feeling better, he got up and started looting the corpses. They only dropped ghoul's claws, some eyeballs, and a weird crystal shard Seth could not appraise. The claws were a common rated crafting material, the rest were probably stuff for alchemy. As he was walking looting the corpses, he found only 3 small souls on them. 16 ghouls dropped just 3 souls. He sighed and started to pick up the throwing knives that had missed. But when Seth picked up the knife the ghoul had broken, he felt something different. Holding the metal shard in his hand he used soul capture, and was able to extract the small soul from the broken throwing knife. So breaking a weapon was the way to get back an infused soul. It felt a little wasteful. But now, together with those he had collected earlier with the party, he now had 23 souls. Many stone caskets in the following rooms were completely broken after the ghouls had burst out from within them. Except for the traps, the corridor was now completely safe and without any monsters. There was also no loot. The dungeon itself was rather barren with such little monsters and loot. Although it felt weird how strong the monsters were. Maybe there were not many people visiting or dying here. Seth had heard that dying people were nutrition to the dungeons. That was after his little adventure in the basement dungeon. It could be a sign that the dungeon was starving. Well, Seth didn't have any plans to feed it. At the end of the narrow passage was a wider room with a high vaulted ceiling and 5 sarcophagi with reliefs of the people they contain on the top. Now, this looked more like a crypt or maybe a burial chamber. But something didn't really fit in with the creepy atmosphere of the dungeon. 2 burnt-down candles spending a dim light on a shabby table in the corner of the room. It did not fit the rest of the dungeon at all. As Seth got close to the table, he heard a scraping from the sarcophagi behind him. It was not the violent bursting like before, but desiccated hands slowly moving the heavy stone plates. What rose from the sarcophagi at the corners looked almost like skeletons. For tall naked figures not much more than skin and bones. The faces had no eyes or lips and looked like a skull with skin tightly pulled over the bone with sharp long fangs. All their head turned towards him when he used observation. Vampire Blood Slave LV-28. The difficulty had suddenly made a massive jump. Weren't there only supposed to be monsters around LV-20? Seth, with Puffles behind him, backed away to the entrance of the passageway. If these things were as bad as the ghouls, they might turn out to be a real threat. They were still slowly climbing out of their eternal resting place, and suddenly Seth did not feel like waiting politely. He equipped the hunter bow and started shooting the closest blood slave. Puffle took the cue and also started shooting. The strengthened effect showed its power when the arrows homed in on the heart. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now LV-22. Under the united fire of Seth's arrows and the Ivysaur's light magic, the monster stood no chance to leave its casket. It gave him enough experience to level up. He only gained 6 free attribute points, but that was not important as he had finally 5 skill points to level Spirit Smithy. This was all he wanted from this dungeon, as such Seth decided on a strategic retreat. Something was not right with this dungeon, and he didn't feel like investigating it after the other 3 came for him. And there was still whatever was in the center sarcophagus. Based on all his knowledge about this kind of room, there would be something a lot worse in there. Are we really going to leave these things alone? He only nodded at Puffle's question and instructed him to put a barrier on the exit of that room. There was something going on in this dungeon, but he would not risk his life to find out what. Puffles was called back to the pet space, and Seth printed out of the dungeon. Halfway down the corridor, he heard the barrier exploding behind him. That was not the slow crumbling, but an explosive shattering. How strong were these things? Seth soon found out when his lead wore slowly shrinking, and he saw the things sprinting along the walls and ceiling of the passageway. Seth swallowed the bitter pill and consumed a speed potion. It was a very expensive potion he had bought for 2 gold during their journey. With the boost, he could barely keep his remaining lead. Now he only needed to reach the exit before the effect of the potion wore off. He reached the end of the corridor, but now came the worst, running up the stairs. This burned as he rushed up the old staircase towards the exit. Behind him, the monsters cheated. They simply stayed on the walls and evaded the tedious ascent. Taking several steps at once, Seth still lost the lead, and the monsters started swiping at him with their claws, cutting deep into his armor and leaving gashed in his flesh. He didn't dare to give them any attention as he rushed for the exit and left the dungeon with a dive. With a big sigh of relief, he looked back at the blood slaves who could not leave the dungeon behind him. He got away, and it only cost him half of his armor's durability. Anyway, it was night and he was alone in the graveyard. He got his level up and didn't he want to wait? He used his 5 SP to level his spirit smithy, and the perk list displayed a new perk. Cerberus, workshop assistant, locked. An assistant. Seth was alone on the wide and quiet graveyard, so he summoned the whole smithy to see what it looked like. Among the different crafting stations, Seth already knew towered a humongous figure. At first, it reminded him of Anubis, as the 3-meter-tall giant was a muscular dog-headed statue. On the second look, unlike Anubis, the golem had 3 dog faces reminding him of a Buddha lycanthrope. The information came to his mind as he inspected the assistant. Cerberus, workshop assistant, locked. Fashioned after the gatekeeper of the underworld, Cerberus is a golem assistant to help with work around the smithy. Cerberus possesses rudimentary intelligence and can either give support during the forging process or take over menial tasks in the smithy. Strength trial needed to unlock. The hunk just stood there completely motionless. Seth needed to overcome another trial similar to the one for the jeweler's table to unlock it. His strength was now 65, and he roughly remembered that the trial for the table was rather easy with 50 dexterity. He looked at the dark and empty graveyard, slightly illuminated by the ghostly glow of his smithy. Should he do it now? He had a quiet and lone moment now, so it may be the best chance to fight the giant here and now. Who knew when he got the next chance? Are you willing to take the strength trial to permanently unlock the workshop assistant? Y/N. Seth was still pondering whether this was the right time, but still decided to go through with it. Ding. A quest has been triggered. Quest, beat the golem. Difficulty, C. Cerberus is temporarily unlocked. Prove your strength to unlock the workshop assistant Cerberus permanently. To prove your strength, you have to best the golem in a contest of strength, an arm wrestling match. Requirement, win against Cerberus 0-1. Rewards, permanently unlock workshop assistant. Do you accept the quest? An arm wrestling match. It took a big load off his mind. Cerberus gave of a suffocation pressure, and Seth was unsure whether he had a chance fighting this thing in a serious match, but strength was one of his forte. He was confident in his attributes and accepted the quest. The eyes of the 3 dog faces glowed up in a purplish blue as the golem started to move. With slow and heavy steps, it walked towards the anvil in the center, knelt down, and set its elbow in the surface. Cerberus kept clenching and unclenching his fist, giving Seth a prompting look. The blacksmith stepped up to the anvil and grasped the golem's giant hand. Both gripped firmly, and thus the battle of attrition started. Seth's muscles bulged as he consciously used all his strength for the first time. The big stone muscles of the golem made a grinding noise as its force grew along with his. They locked eyes and kept increasing their grip and pressure until their fingers dug into each other's hands. It was a tie as their hands came to a standstill in their original position. After a while, Seth felt his muscles start twitching as they screamed in pain, but he could also see dust crumbling from the golem's arm. The back and forth that had existed before finally started to tilt. Unfortunately, in Cerberus' favor. As a golem, it had simply better stamina than a body made of flesh and blood. Seeing his hand slowly giving in despite his best efforts, Seth started to panic. But he was a long way from giving up. So what if his current strength was not enough? He thought and summoned his status. Looking into the purple glowing eyes of Cerberus, he started putting his fresh attribute points into strength. It's not cheating. It's a common thing for the main character to suddenly power up during a hard fight. His strength reached 70 and the situation was reversed, as it was now the golem's arm slowly giving away. More and more dust and sand fell from its arm as it tried to fight back. But the outcome was inevitable. After the protagonist had miraculously powered up during the battle, the antagonist had no choice but to accept his fate. Its eyes glowed up brightly as the golem's elbow broke under the pressure. Ding! You have completed the quest, beat the golem, you have permanently unlocked Cerberus, workshop assistant. The golem stood back up straight, and its broken arm was restored to the way it was before. Facing Seth, it gave him a formal 90-degree bow, accepting him as the new master and awaiting his orders. At this moment a wave of information concerning Cerberus flooded Seth's brain. The range of tasks it could be given and the limitations pertaining to it. Many menial and repetitious tasks could be handed over to the golem. He could also support him in forging like a forging assistant or similar a power hammer. It was a shame that Seth would not be able to make Cerberus fight for him. As Cerberus was an assistant and guardian for the workshop, it could only be summoned in the workshop. Its range of action was restricted to within the workshop or the immediate surroundings. He would not be able to simply summon the golem to protect him as a bodyguard. It was a disappointment because Cerberus was actually a lot stronger than Seth was. The golem's power was simply nerfed for the trial. Although it could not simply fight for him, the golem had a great range of use. This opened up a great opportunity for him. There were still the bunch of armors he needed to send to Zyke. Seth had procrastinated to make them since it was a very monotone and unrewarding task. Now he could simply use the golem to make all the scales he needed and then assemble the armors later. It saved him a lot of time and effort. This meant opening a shop became a necessity. Forging was loud. It was not as loud as he would have expected, but it was not something he could just do in a hotel room in the middle of a residential area. He had only dared to forge on the airship because of the VIP rooms and their excellent sound isolation magic. The golem would be able to work 24/7 all day long until there was no material left anymore, once he had an official workshop. It was already so late, and he needed to meet with Mike and the other again tomorrow. He decided to find a workshop in the coming days. Seth unsummoned the smithy and returned to his inn for a good night's sleep. Or what was left of the night. The following day started with a similar dungeon run. Seth worked on his teamwork with the rest of the party, and they started to build up a good rapport. In the quieter moments, he also managed to start up a conversation and got closer to Mina. As a consequence, he could not go and look for a workshop. After the dungeon, he went drinking with Mina, and they spent the night in a different inn. Obviously, they would not do it at the place of her adoptive parents. He woke up in a room covered in randomly thrown away clothes. It felt great waking up with a beautiful girl in his arms, and actually remembering how he got there. Nya, she yawned and woke up. Lifting her head, she planted a soft kiss on his lips with a grin. You know, I might know a solution to your problem, she grinned mischievously. Seth could only think that she meant the shop. They had talked about finding a shop yesterday evening. Oh, really? Go on. She started moving and moves on top of him. Hee, not for free. You have to earn it. Mina kept him occupied until late at noon, so they came almost too late to the team meeting. But she really told him about a struggling smithy in the commercial district's second underground level. She knew the owner and told him that he might be willing to strike a deal with Seth. Seth decided to take a look the next day. Seth felt only a little bad about leaving their big, expensive hotel room to Puffles and spending the nights with Mina in some cheap-in rooms. Today he did not join the team on the raid and decided to visit the commercial district with the Ivysaur. After he managed to part from the the impassionate cat girl, he returned to the inn for a shower, a meal, and to pick up the caterpillar. The two leisurely walked around Aura. They had already spent some time in the city, but they still felt like tourists. Every time they explored the city, they found new interesting things. They reached the entrance to the lower levels after some detours. Mina had described the location of the shop to him. It was called Marn's Weapons and located on the second underground level. He knew he entered the right place when the deafening sound of hammers hitting metal surrounded him. The people here either had their own little shops or supplied the weapon and armor stores closer to the surface. The workshops for blacksmiths and similarly loud craftsmen were separated from residential areas and needed to meet several conditions such as basic sound isolation. Another one was that they needed chimneys leading all the way back to the surface for the smoke of the forges to escape. The shop Mina told him about was a tiny store towards the end of a passage that led away from the main hallways. Like the other stores on this underground level, the front was a dirty brick wall, and had a cheap sign with the name of the shop. This was the cheapest level just above the black market. The black market had no laws or regulations, and was rumored to be riddled with all kinds of illegal business and criminals. So technically this level was already close to a ghetto. The door was locked, so he knocked at the door. He heard a crashing and rumbling from inside. Stuff falling, stumbling steps, and finally the key turning in the lock. A woman? What opened the door was a pale beauty with long blonde hair and pointy ears. She had a fine androgynous face with smooth subtle skin. She looked exactly like elves from games and movies Seth knew. Her hair was disheveled and she had a troubled look on her face. Hello. I am sorry, but we are closed right now, she said with a deep and smooth voice. That's okay, I am not here to buy something. I have a different business. Are you Marn? Why yes. Are you here because of the department? Please, give me some more time. Calm down. I am not a debt collector. Mina told me you might be open to rent your shop to me. But she said Mina was a man. Oh. You know Mina, she visibly relaxed and laughed. I am a man. Don't worry, many get that wrong. Seth was a little perplexed but followed Marn into the shop. The inside of the shop was a complete mess. Weapon racks and armor stands were thrown around and broken. Weapons covered the floor and even the counter was toppled. It seemed that Marn really had some problems. Behind the sales room were storage, a room for a smithy, and a small living room. They sat down in the living room to talk. Marn was a half-elf and explained that he had started off as a blacksmith in his home village and originally came to Aura to learn from a dwarven master. Like Seth, he had not known about the separation of the city and the necessity to get a recommendation. He was an elven blacksmith, which was an uncommon blacksmith class. As a pure crafting class, becoming an adventurer was not an option. Marn contracted a department to open a shop, but business was brutal. There were many blacksmiths opening shops to make a name for themselves and learn under a dwarven master. Now he was not only broke but owed money and even lacked the means to return home. Yesterday some rough guys had smashed his shop and taken his best weapons as a deposit for the departments. With this, his shop was doomed. As Seth explained his proposition, the other's face lit up. He would take over the shop rights from him, and would pay off the department as long as Marn took care of the paperwork. Marn agreed, but Seth could see a little regret in his handsome face. He was not ready to give up, yet. The half-elf had come here with great aspirations, but they would end with this deal. Looking at the fine features with a sorrowful melancholic expression, Seth could still not believe this face really belonged to a man. This gave him a great idea of how he could help. You know, I might not have the time to take care of the shop all the time. Do you want to manage the place in my stead? You could still make your own weapons and sell them here, too. It was a nice way to ask for a clerk. A beautiful clerk would always draw in customers. Gladly, the elf exclaimed as he understood that he would not have to give up on his dreams yet. Of course, Seth did this not only to get a handsome clerk for his shop. Marn was an elven blacksmith. Maybe he could learn some ballads for enchanting from him. He had heard that this was an elven forte. After dealing with the business part, they had a comfortable conversation which finally led to how they met Mina and her party. The elf had met Mina in a bar, too. She had listened to his worries when his shop was down in the dumps. They never ended up in bed together but became good friends. Many of the weapons Mina's party used were actually made by Marn. Unfortunately, they were also more or less his only customers. A beautiful face brought not only privileges. He often met guys mistaking him for a female blacksmith, and holding a grudge when he told them he was a guy. As if it was his fault that they got horny for him. Their pleasant conversation was interrupted by heavy knocks on the door, followed by the sound of a door getting kicked in. "Marn! Where are you, you little? Do you have the money?" the intruder roared. They stood up and looked into the sales room. There stood 3 thugs, who could not look any more like thugs. They wore ripped-up clothes and their hairstyles were variations of having shaved various patches of their head. The weapons in their hand were all uncommon, and from their description, Seth could guess that they were the ones stolen from Marn's shop. "Hey, Marn. Did you seduce another guy? Does he know you have a noodle?" He laughed dirty. "Anyways, we are here because Mr. J wants his money. You know what happens if you don't pay up." He kicked one of the weapon racks lying on the ground to emphasize his point. Seth almost could not believe this really happened. Also, Mr. J. Did they think this was a Fatman comic and their boss was the jester? "Where is the bureau of your boss?" Seth stepped forward and asked. "Huh? Nobody was talking to you. Marn. If you have the money to get a male prostitute, you should first pay your debt." Seth used observation on the 3 thugs who shivered when they felt his eyes gaze into their souls. The 2 in the back were LV5 and the guy in the front was LV7. These guys would be barely able to survive the sewer dungeon. Seth felt that he might accidentally kill them with their level difference. He summoned Puffles, the mighty, to show them the ropes. "Puff, can you teach them a lesson?" "Q. Why do I have to clean up after you?" "Haha, look. The hoe summoned his little worm friend because he is afraid of us, ugh." The thug in the front was rudely interrupted by a light bolt in his shoulder. Flames were burning in Puffles' eyes. "How dare you belittle me? Puffles, the mighty. Kaya. Just don't kill them." Seth reminded his pet. Another 2 bolts pierced the leader's knees, and the same happened to the 2 in the back. With pain and fear-filled cries, all 3 broke down on the floor, bleeding heavily. The next moment they were covered in soothing light, and their wounds healed. Just as they calmed down, another rain of light bolts pierced their joints. "I am not done yet." After Puffles vented his anger on the thugs, it returned back to the pet space, leaving the healthy but traumatized thugs lying on the store floor. Their clothes were covered in holes and drenched in sweat and blood when Seth stepped up to them. "So, where is Mr. J.'s place? You know what happens if you don't bring me there." He gave the leader a light kick to emphasize his point. Marn explained to him that Mr. J was the loan shark he had gotten the money for the shop from. He was one of many shady businessmen on the 3rd underground level, the black market. Seth collected the stolen weapons from the thugs and ordered them to lead him to Mr. J's place. The 3 thugs led them down some dirty staircase into the lowest underground level. This level was not officially made, but hewn into the bedrock by people looking for a place to stay. As such, it had a lot more random and maze-like. The quality of the work also varied greatly. There were places rivaling the first underground floor made by dwarves with expansive streets and high-quality masonry. And then there were narrow passages that were just wide enough for one person to push through, and stone rooms with entrances covered by worn-out rags. Those places also tended to not smell very good, since these places were naturally not connected to the sewers. The lighting was intermittent at best. Unlike the other underground floors that were lit by magic lanterns, here there were only a few of them and mostly low-quality ones. Light on this floor came from torches and candles, which didn't help improve the air quality in these narrow tunnels. Seth did not understand how anyone would be willing to live down here. But on the other hand, he could understand that people were ready to go a long way to survive. He felt the greedy and almost animalistic gazes from the dark rooms, entrances, and shadows around them. He equipped his armor, just in case. Mr. J's place was part of a row of houses with smoothly worked housefront, and had a reinforced door. The bright light from magic lanterns fell from the only openings in the walls. Arrow slits, thin openings for projectiles to be shot from. The leader announced their arrival with loud knocks on the door. A minion of slightly higher quality opened the door. You could call him a butler if you wanted to be nice, but if you chose to be honest you would call him a bouncer. The thug explained who we were and the bouncer gave our group a once-over. He grunted and invited us in without a word. He did not even bother to ask for their weapons. Asking to come without weapons or hand over weapon probably didn't make much sense in a world where anyone could conceal an arsenal in their inventory. Seth thought to himself and entered the mansion with Marn. Yes, a mansion. It did not look like much from the outside, but the inside was lavishly decorated with all kinds of expensive-looking furniture and ornaments. Loan sharks obviously made a lot of money and Mr. J liked to spend a lot, too. The bounceller, as Seth decided to call him, led them to Mr. J's office. Marn nodded when Seth asked whether this was really Mr. J. At the big desk in the room sat a fucking leprechaun. Well, it was probably some kind of gnome, but he wore a green hat and a green suit with golden ornaments. You are an elf. Ah. Marn. You decided to give me a visit. How nice of you. I hope you are here to pay your debts. You want to try to tell me that still can't pay, right? I have been really lenient, you know. Any other moneylender would not have such angelic patience as me. You can ask anybody. You haven't even paid the interest in 3 months. Mr. G would have skinned you after the first. Mr. L would have salvaged you and sold your organs after months. I feel almost exploited with the way you treat me, he said, theatrical, making all kinds of gestured and acting like a poor victim. Seth didn't feel like going along with the gnome's act. He really just wanted to leave this place as fast as possible. The third level was in some way worse than a dungeon or cave. He had felt eyes on him with every step. Eyes that wanted to rob him. That evaluated the risk. Eyes that already calculated the price of his stuff after they killed and robbed him. And this feeling was the greatest inside this subterranean mansion. Of course, he did not think he was in danger, but it was unpleasant nonetheless. How much does he owe you? He interrupted the gnome's monologue. Mr. J didn't like it one bit. His face that had been doing all kinds of overacted expressions became completely serious. And so became his tone. Your friend is no fun, Marn. It is very rude to simply interrupt my monologues. But okay. Let us talk about business. Do you want to pay his debt? Good. Marn originally lends 20 gold from us to buy a shop and materials with a monthly interest of 50%. He paid, the gnome looked in his papers. 2 interests in 5 months. This means he owes me 50 gold. Do you have this much? The gnome did not even grin or gloat. His face was still as if made from stone. Interrupting his speech must have really offended him. Seth gave Marn a startled look. He really owed this much? Why, you took my best weapons instead of the 3rd and 4th interest. So I only owe you 1 interest. Mr. J glared at Marn but looked back down on into his papers. After skimming through some pages, he sighed, annoyed. These goddamn gorillas. He whispered to himself. Ah, yes. I guess that happened. 30 gold then. The transaction went unexpectedly smooth. Seth paid the money and got Marn's contract in exchange. 30 gold was no small amount. 10 of it was Marn's department. Seth would have him work for quite some time to pay him back. But with this, he finally owned a shop. Seth had the way back on his map, so they hurried to get out from this unpleasant place. After they left the office. Go and find out who that was. Nobody interrupts me and gets away with it. Yes, sir, the bouncler said and left the room. Is this really necessary? The gnome asks in the room. I told you to ruin this elf. How dare you question me? A voice answered him. Yes, sir. Seth and Marn returned to the shop where the half-elf started to tidy up the smashed racks and fallen weapons with a newfound motivation. The tour into the third level had been longer than expected, and it was already evening. This meant Marn could only go to change the papers of the shop tomorrow, making Seth the new owner. Seth returned to the inn for the first time in 3 days, and had a long and good night's sleep. Tomorrow he would return to dungeon diving with the Yulecat fur. Marn visited him in the evening a day later, and brought the papers he had to sign to take over the shop. Of course, Seth read them before he signed them. He finally had a shop. This meant he could test Cerberus. He was too excited to wait for tomorrow, especially since he was scheduled for another dungeon dive with the party. Seth left Puffles at the inn to sleep and followed Marn back to the shop. The half-elf didn't know what Seth planned to do but dutifully led the way. After all, Seth was his new employer now and gave him a chance to stay as a blacksmith in Aura. In the smithing room in the back, Seth asked Marn to pack away his equipment into his inventory to make space. The elf's jaw dropped to the ground when Seth suddenly summoned the ethereal spirit Smithy. Seth didn't make a big secret out of the rating of his class anymore, but he still refrained from explaining all his skills. So he just gave Marn a short explanation. Once again, among the different crafting stations towered Cerberus, the golem assistant. It knelt down when Seth approached it. With a shriek, Marn crouched into a corner, afraid of the hulking figure that suddenly started moving. "Ah! Please stand up. Act casual," he spoke to Cerberus, but Marn also stood up with an awkward expression. Seth felt conflicted having this silent giant act so servile to him. He felt a connection with the golem after their intense battle of strength, and judged it unworthy for such an opponent to kneel to anyone. What he didn't feel bad about was exploiting him to the max. Seth took out 200 ingots of high-quality steel, and stacked them into the corner of the room. Cerberus was only able to do simple tasks, so Seth needed to make equipment for him, similar to what one might use with a power hammer or a hydraulic press. Using one of the ingots, Seth started to forge a punch, an embossing punch. He split the ingot into 2 parts. He forged a stamp with the positive shape of a scale and cooled it. He ground and filed it into shape until he was satisfied. Then he heated the other part of the steel, shaped it into a nice plate, and punched the negative shape of the scale into the softened metal. After quenching the plate, he had a simple punch for the scales of a scale armor. Now, all Cerberus had to do was forging the ingots into sheets, and punching the scales out of them with its overwhelming strength. It was a simple task he could leave to Cerberus, who could work without a break until the material ran out. All Seth would have to do then was assembling the scale armors. This method would inevitably end up creating some scraps. Cerberus was not able to utilize the furnace, so Seth gave him a lot more material than was actually needed to make 30 scale armors. Seth could simply smelt the scrap when he returned, so he did not lose any material here. With a satisfied smile, he watched his new slaw assistant start using the tools in the smithy to forge sheet metal. He wanted to watch the whole process at least once to make sure it really worked. Marn, on the other hand, was completely flabbergasted. "This is Cerberus, by workshop assistant," he said, turning toward the petrified Marn. "Workshop assistant," the elf repeated. Then he looked up the 3-meter-tall figure with bulging muscles, wide shoulders, and 3 scary dog faces. "Using a golem to forge?" Sure, dwarves were definitely able to make golems like this, but it seemed like a waste to use it as a workshop assistant. "What is it?" Seth asked when he notices the elf's expression. It just seems like a waste to use a golem as a menial labor. It looks so strong, shouldn't you take it to the dungeon?" If only he could. Seth would have loved to bring Cerberus to the dungeon. Don't worry. It also defends the workshop. So if people like yesterday show up again, they might not be so lucky next time. Seth patted the half-elf's shoulder and prompted him to follow back into the showroom. Marn had used the day to tidy up the place. He set up the undamaged weapon racks in neat rows and got rid of the broken pieces. The only weapons in the store now were some of Marn's lesser works. The best ones had long been cashed in by the loan shark. But all of them showed the signs of weak enchantment. It was one of the reasons he kept Marn. He hoped that he could learn the elvish forging ballads, or at least some of them. Not Seth filled the racks with the leftover from the weapons he had forged on his journey. Since he had sold most of the products he made from snake bones, these were just the leftovers he did not get to put into the auction house. Displayed on the weapon racks were now 15 uncommon serpent daggers made from the teeth, and 10 uncommon serpent sabers and cutlasses made from the ribs. Seth had stayed with a bladed weapon since the ribs already sported the curved form. All of them had the option to poison the target by nature if supplied with mana. And Seth had used a poison enchantment to further strengthen this option. He had tested them once or twice, but it was still not some kind of overpowered instant death poison effect. It was more of a slow-acting poison that slowed movements or slowly drained the HP. Compared to the actual damage of the weapons, they were negligible. The last step was something Seth had instructed Marn to get in town. The elf's experience with theft reminded Seth of the Arcane Emporium and the Desert Dragon Pavilion. Seth had the elf get anti-theft magic for the shop. It was in the form of an easy-to-use scroll. Once he used it, everything in the room was covered by a thin membrane of light. Nobody would be able to move the product except for those authorized by the user. That was unless the thief managed to find a loophole or overpower the magic. Seth had given Marn money to buy the most expensive scroll, so there should be few people able to get around it. Late in the night, Seth returned to the inn. Unlike Seth, Marn had a hard time falling asleep that night. He was living in the store, in a room right beside a tirelessly working golem forging and punching steel. Past midnight, the rhythmic thumping of the hammer finally lulled him into sleep. There was another person listening to the sound of hammering standing in the darkness outside of the store. Covered in a dark cloak, he felt the elf finally falling asleep. He had no idea what was making the noise of forging, but he felt no other life inside the building. He was hired to maim the elven blacksmith and make him leave Aura. He did not need to care about any kind of device. That was what he thought. As the assassin cracked the lock on the front door, a pair of violet glowing eyes looked up from their work. The men stepped into the shop and halted as the sound of hammers was suddenly silenced. With his skill, he could make out a giant figure entering the room from the other side. This wasn't he, the elf. Was this the other guy his client mentioned? He got ready to end this fight before the other could make any light. Marn, who had just fallen asleep, jumped up in shock. He was woken up by a blood-curdling primal scream. Bathed in sweat, he rushed out of his room, but only found the empty store. He entered the smithy but only saw the silhouette of Cerberus standing at the anvil, slowly punching a scale by pushing the stamp through the softened metal as if it was clay. Was it just a dream? So much had happened lately. He was so tired. Marn returned back to his room and fell asleep again. In the darkness, his sleepy eyes missed the rivulets of blood stream down from the canine jaws and across Golem's chest. All that was left of the intruder was a small pool of blood on the floor that would have vanished by the time morning came. Advertisement. The following days leading up to the exam were dominated by fighting in dungeons and working on his teamwork with Yulkat's fur. They slowly started to fight in more dangerous dungeons, and Seth and the group got used to each other. In the time Seth worked with the adventurer party, he realized how hard-pressed for money adventurers actually were. Without a well-paid quest, they could only grind the monsters in dungeons and sell the drops. The money they made in this barely justified the work put into it. Seth felt bad for them, but it was good for him. Grinding meant that they had to kill a lot of mobs, and he managed to get another level up before the exam. Puffles also reached LV20 in record time. Regularly fighting monsters in the range of LV40 made him suspicious of the dungeon on the graveyard. Arguably, those LV28 blood slaves were almost as strong or even stronger than the creatures he had been fighting together with Mina's party. He decided to report that dungeon before they left for the exam. The receptionist took notice of his concerns and filed his report away. It did not seem like they took it very seriously, but Seth did not feel like it was his problem. He did his duty, and that was it. The day of the exam was unexpectedly not them setting off for a great B-rank quest, but only the briefing on said quest. In the morning, the parties taking part in the exam were asked to take a seat in a big hall. On the podium in the front stood a rough-looking middle-aged man in unfittingly formal attire. Some of you I know personally. Some of you are new. I am the guild master, and I will explain the exam to you. To rank up, you will have to prove your skill and expertise. All of you are C ranks. You will take part in a real B-rank quest under the supervision of an A-rank and 2 B-rank parties. They will be your proctors and examiners. What followed was the explanation of what a B-rank quest was. Unlike the quests on lower ranks, which could normally be taken by a single adventurer or party of the same rank, B-rank quests required several parties of the same rank to safely accomplish the task. The role of the proctors was to examine their actions and step in if it became clear that the C-rank parties cannot handle the situation. The quest itself was an escort mission for the Palace Trading Company, one of the richest merchant guilds in Aura. The quest was to escort a merchant caravan that transported goods for the twin city of Aura, Tora, within the mountain range. Tora was smaller than Aura, but it was the gateway to the central subterranean kingdom of the dwarves. The trade route led through the territory of high-level beasts which warranted the quest's rank. The journey will take 2 weeks, 1 to get there and 1 back. You will take care of your rations and equipment yourselves. The beasts you will encounter are wyverns, distant relatives of dragons. Even with the proctors and examiners, there is no guaranteed safety for you. You can drop out of the exam now if you are too afraid. The parties were given another day to prepare their equipment, and set-off was scheduled for the day after tomorrow. It was not a problem for Seth, as he had expected to set off the same day. He had already prepared enough food for 3 weeks, and a nice tent and sleeping bag. But this gave him the chance to visit the tailor he had commissioned to process the Ivysaur threat. He had visited before to get more sets of clothes for traveling, but the clerk told him that his commission was not ready yet. Yule Cat's Fur actually had the same idea, and were surprised by the bonus time. Instead of jumping back into the dungeons, they used the rest of the day as a break to relax and refill their energy for the coming quest. Seth and Mina went on a date to explore the amusement district of Aura. It was a little like visiting a funfair. There were stalls with games and souvenirs. Of course, also a lot of food, and they ate lots of sweets. Especially Puffles enjoyed stuff like cotton candy. Seth used the next free day to visit the tailor shop. It was a big store at one of the central squares in the commercial district. The founder was known to be a master tailor, while the shop itself was led by his apprentices and their descendants. It was a big family business, and the best he was able to find when it came to skill, and well known for its quality. If anyone in Aura was able to make something good from the Ivysaur threat, then it was the current master of the shop, who was close to becoming a master tailor, or his apprentices. Maybe if he found one of those Arachne Weaver, but Seth found that the true masters rarely left the territory of their race. Seth did not spare any expense when he ordered a cloth armor from this place. He had no preferences when he placed the order, as the only actual cloth armor he knew was a gambeson. That's why he left it to the tailor to choose the best kind of armor to make from this material. A big surprise awaited him when he came to ask for the progress of his order for the first time. After seeing the material, the shopmaster himself decided to take the order. This change meant that it was not ready when he originally thought he would leave. The day before, after he had returned to the inn, he got the notice that the master would finish his order on the day before they actually left. That was today. Seth was full of expectations for the work of someone close to master rank. "Hello, I am here to collect my order. I got a notice that it would be finished today." He stepped to the counter and talked to the clerk. "Do you have a receipt?" the young clerk asks friendly. This receipt was a small piece of enchanted paper, printed from a magic device. It was a simple way to make sure the right person received the products. Seth took it from his inventory and handed it to the clerk. His eyes widened when he found his order. "You are the customer who brought that golden threat. That is great. The master wishes to meet you. Would you have time now?" he said with an excited glint in his eyes. Sure. Seth answered perplexed and was promptly pulled to the back of the shop. Sitting cross-legged in a room lined with shelves containing bales of cloth was a rather old man. He had a respectable white beard, but the wrinkles around his eyes made him out to be a man who likes to laugh. As he sat there and worked on a piece of clothing with the cloth in his hand, he looked almost like a meditating master. When he notices his guest, he put away the cloth he was sewing right now and looked up to Seth. "Hello, I am Nadell, the master of this shop." "Are you Seth Smith, the man who brought this magnificent thread?" he said, holding up a short piece of Puffle's thread. The golden metallic material caught the light and sparkled magnificently. "Ah. Yes. Was this why you wanted to talk to me?" "Actually, no. I wanted to personally hand over your order and thank you for bringing me such a magnificent material." "Magnificent?" Seth asked, baffled. The ancient bronze was barely rated uncommon. Someone close to master should be able to easily get his hands on something better, right? "You seem confused." Seth mentioned his class and explained his confusion to Nadell, who immediately understood him. "You are still young. You did not have much discourse with other crafting professions, right? Tell me, what makes you think this is just an uncommon material?" "I have an appraisal skill." "What exactly does it do?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Let me bet. It recognizes crafting materials for blacksmithing, yes?" he continued after Seth affirmed with a nod. "Many crafting professions have specific skills to appraise materials. And that is the crux of the matter. The judgment is specific. Just like you can judge materials you cannot use in your profession, all material is judged by the use in your profession. You would probably melt down this thread and make a weapon or armor from the metal, right?" Again, Seth affirmed with a nod and kept listening to the old man's explanation. "Using it like this is actually destroying many of its properties. To your skill, the metal is barely uncommon. But a metal wire thin like a thread, stronger than steel, and with a magic conductivity rivaling mithril is a rare material to my eyes, even close to epic." Seth could only look flabbergasted at the thin wire in the Nadell's hand. "That is why I thank you. It is hard to find rare or epic materials for tailoring. Not many metals can be turned this thin, and monster materials are hard to get, as beasts using thread are often especially dangerous. Your material actually helped me to level up my skill, another step closer to master," he said with a benevolent smile. Seth imagined the progress one would make if there was no possibility to upgrade to a better material. No matter what you make, only getting the fraction of a percentage. Making hundreds or thousands of products a necessity for a single level up. He suddenly was glad that he was a blacksmith and not a tailor. Nadell read his thoughts and could only smile. He leaned back and took out a package from under the table. "Here. Unwrap it and see if it fits. I really put in a lot of work." From the bundle came a bunch of long flowing fabric sparkling in a reddish golden sheen. It was a long-sleeved jacket reaching down to his knees. It differed from other gambesons he had seen since he came to this world. Displaying the typical square pattern of layered and quilted cloth, it was still a lot thinner and flexible than the ones he had seen. This meant he would be able to comfortably wear this under his armor without impeding his movements. Completely made of the golden thread of the Ivysaur, it was a very flashy piece of armor. Nadell's golden jacket. Rare. Fizz. Def. 500 mag. Def. 150. 1. Strengthen defense by 45% for 10's mana cost, 70. 2. Weight of the armor is halved, no cost. Durability, 3000. A high-quality cloth armor made by the experienced hands of tailor craftsman Nadell. Excellent weaving and sewing techniques imbued this item with overwhelming performance and effects. Seth's eyes almost fell out of his face. This jacket alone rivaled the performance of the serpent armor. And he could combine them. The smooth metallic fabric felt cool under his touch. The inside was lined with a different warmth, making it unnecessary to wear any clothes below the cloth armor. He equipped the jacket, and was almost unable to feel its weight. Even so, it was weaved from metal with several layers and quilted. It felt no bit heavier or more cumbersome than his ordinary clothes. The hems were intricately weaved and immediately gave Seth the idea to maybe embed gemstone into the cloth armor. "Oh my God!" was all Seth could utter after staring at and feeling the armor for a long time. Nadal had a self-satisfied smile on his lips, watching the joy of his client. This jacket really rivaled his best works, mostly because it was hard to get his hand on such materials. How much?" Seth stuttered. He had not expected this. He had no idea what this kind of quality work would cost him. "Nothing. I have more than enough money. Getting the chance to work with this kind of material was already worth my time," he said friendly. Seth incredulously looked at him, and then understood. Nadal was similar to him. He had made a lot of money from his skills. But unlike Seth, he had a hard time finding materials, no matter how much he was ready to pay. This meant his skills stagnated. Having the chance to work with an epic-rated material, for free, was more than worth the time he invested. His reward was the proficiency gained. Next, Nadal put a few bundles of thread on the table. It was the material he had not needed for the armor, about a third of what Seth had given him. "Maybe there is one thing. Do you have any more of this thread? It was my first time working with this material. I think if I had another chance, I could make an even better one." Now that he mentioned it, the old man's skill level had increased after finishing this. Maybe the next one he made was epic rated. Unfortunately, despite Puffles making more thread in his free time, it was nowhere near the amount they had brought the first time. "I gave you all the thread I had at the time. I only have a little more," he told Nadal honestly. "But you have some more," as answer Seth took out the bundle that Puffles had produced in the time they had stayed in Aura. It was just a fraction of what Seth had given him before. "At this rate, you would have enough to make another one in a few weeks. But are you even interested in another armor made by me?" "Of course, it would be free again," he reassured. He was really eager to keep working with Seth. Even more so, after knowing that Seth had a source for the material he needed so much. It would have been stupid not to take this chance. Having a high-tier tailor owe you a favor was worth a lot. Even more than Seth imagined. He immediately agreed. He packed up the rest of the thread and promised to come back once he had enough for another cloth armor like this. It was afternoon. Seth had still time. There was something he definitely wanted to try right now. He did not return to the inn, but went straight down to the workshop. At the counter was Marn happily smiling away. "What's up? Why are you smiling so much?" The elf brought out several stakes of gold coins. "We had customers today and yesterday. The first in weeks. I sold one of your daggers yesterday, and today a party came and bought 4 weapons at once. 3 of yours and 1 of the new ones I made. I am so happy." This explained the sudden sunshine mood of the half-elf. He had no business in weeks and suddenly great success in 2 days in a row. Seth answered him with a smile and bagged the gold coins. This was his shop after all. He continued to the smithing room, where Cerberus was still tirelessly working on making scales. After telling the golem to take a break, Seth took his place on the anvil. The first thing he brought out was his superior sword. He was tight on uncommon souls and he wanted at least an uncommon one for this. It was unfortunate, but now that he knew that he could salvage souls from a broken weapon, this became necessary. With the help of Cerberus, they broke the superior sword apart. From the broken pieces, Seth was able to collect the uncommon orc soul. It looked slightly damaged, so this way was not the ultimate answer of how to get back souls. From the raids in the past week, he had gained another 50 souls. The orc soul was medium-sized, so Seth started to fuse the small souls, ending up with 4 medium-sized common souls. And fused those into the orc soul. After absorbing them, the soul had not only healed but also grown in power, but the description had not changed from soul, medium, crafting material, uncommon. With the soul powered up, Seth started to forge it with Sharon's obel. With the jacket in mind, he forged a breastplate with long folds to get close to the shape of the jacket. He didn't really know if it mattered that the shape of the soul armor fit the equipment he inserted it. Maybe it was already enough as long as they would take up the same equipment slot. No matter what, he didn't want to take a chance here. Soul armor. Uncommon. Mag-Def, 230. 1. Grants 1.7x damage against enemies with less STR. 2. Plus 310 mana. An uncommon piece of soul armor. Can be worn as is or infused into a physical bracer. What Seth bet on was that he could use soul infusion to enchant equipment that could not be enchanted with engraving, inlays, or forging ballads. Namely cloth and leather pieces that could normally only be enchanted using spells. Seth took the soul engraver and started engraving a circuit for strength increase. To power the enchantment to increase the strength, the option of mana increase had lowered. Soul armor. Uncommon. Mag-Def, 230. 1. Grants 1.7x damage against enemies with less STR. 2. Plus 280 mana. 3. Increase STR plus 15. An uncommon piece of soul armor. Can be worn as is or infused into physical armor. 15 increase in strength was the best he could do with his current skill. There was still a lot of bonus mana left. Just one enchantment was not able to harness the full potential of the soul armor. Once his enchantment skill was higher, Seth would start plastering the armor with enchantments for all attributes. And all the resistances. And the effect could be greater too. But for now, his skill only sufficed to do this. His proficiency for blacksmith and enchantment increased by 4% and 7% respectively. Of course, he could have also simply worn the two separately, but he wanted to test whether he could infuse the soul into cloth armor. He could still wear them separately if it failed. Seth brought out Nadel's golden jacket and started to infuse the soul armor. It was very different from infusing a soul into a piece of armor. He could feel the soul slowly sinking into the different strands of thread the fabric was weaved from. It was similar to how he stretched the soul into different parts to infuse into the separate parts of a weapon. Just that it was the different threads that made up the cloth now. Infusion of the soul into many different parts cost a lot of concentration, and took much longer than his previous tries. Only very slowly did the soul armor start sinking into the golden jacket and matched its physical form. Again, he could feel that at this point he could take the soul back out with soul capture. He didn't. Putting it in had cost him a lot of energy, taking it out just to see what happens was not an option. Instead, he took the jacket and dunked it into the water of sticks to fix the soul and finish the item. Ding. Skill, Soul Infusion LV3 has become Soul Infusion LV4. He noticed a new perk that was added after looking at the skills perk list. It was no wonder that he had felt like he could infuse souls into cloth and leather. The new perk was literally infusing souls into cloth and leather items. Not only did his soul infusion level up, but he was also notified that he had created a unique item. Snobbish Brute's Jacket. Unique. Fizz. Def, 500 mag, Def, 365. 1. Strengthen defense by 45% for 10's mana cost, 70. 2. Weight of the armor is halved, no cost. 3. Grants 1.7x damage against enemies with less STR. 4. Plus 270 mana. 5. Increase STR plus 15. Durability, 3000. A high-quality cloth armor made by the experienced hands of a tailor craftsman Nadel. Excellent weaving and sewing techniques imbued this item with overwhelming performance and effects. Special treatment by an aspiring blacksmith has boosted the performance once again. Now, this was an item Seth got excited about. Just the fact that it had 5 different magical effects were already awesome, even so, some of them were more useful than others. He put the jacket into his inventory and wore it via quick equip. Unlike increasing his strength with attribute points, he did not feel his muscles suddenly bulging as he wore the jacket. But he definitely felt more powerful having his strength boosted past 80. In preparation for tomorrow, Seth also decided to enchant the 2 soul rings he had made before giving himself another plus 15 buff on strength and agility. He decided on another strength buff to take advantage of the new armor's options. The only flaw on this awesome item was the weird name. Anyways, with this item, he felt fully prepared for the upcoming exam. On the morning of the day of the exam, all adventurers taking part in the quest assembled at the Great Gates of Aura. The merchant caravan was already waiting outside the city. It was a long row of carts and covered wagons with traders and drivers already waiting. Seth wore his new jacket and the serpent bone armor on top. The others had explained to him that as escorts they had to be ready at all times. There was no coming back if you got caught off guard without wearing your armor. He checked his status one last time and distributed the 9 attribute points from leveling up. Status: Name, Seth Smith. Mark of Ivysaur title, faster than the thought. Level, 23. EXP, 3% race, Orihuma. Sex, male age, 23. Class, Spirit Blacksmith, unique. Affiliation, System Church. Health, 1000/1000. Mana, 330 plus 200 plus 270. Strength, 70 plus 30. Dexterity, 68. Agility, 40 plus 15. Intelligence, 33. Willpower, 40. Endurance, 50. Personality, 14. Luck, 18. Free AP, attribute points 0. Free SP, skill points 1. Defense, physical, 1500, 150 plus 50 plus 500 plus 800, ENDX 3. Magical, 864, 80 plus 25 plus 125 plus 145 plus 124 plus 365, WILX 2. Fire immunity. Poison resistance, 15% plus 22%. He was now the same level as his age. It reminded him that his birthday would be coming up soon. The new armor and soul armor gave him a significant boost in his defense. The biggest change of the last few days had his skill window. He had fought a lot and his weapons mastery had grown to LV9. Skill window. Blacksmith, Adept, LV5, 39%. Enchantment, Beginner, LV7, 89%. Goldsmith, Beginner, LV5. Blacksmith's Eyes, LV4. Blueprint, Adept, LV2. Soul Infusion, LV3. Spirit Smithy, LV5. Spirit Capture, LV3. Spirit Forging, Adept, LV1. Weapon Mastery, Adept, LV9, 16%. Calm Reaction, Passive, LV7. Fear Resistance, Passive, LV8. Poison Resistance, Passive, LV2. Fire Affection, Passive, LV3. Fire Manipulation, Ability, LV9. Map LV for Observation, LV4. Concealment, LV4. Energy Circulation, LV1. Universal Translation, LV Max. Energy Circulation was a skill that had appeared in his skill window after the forging of Sharon S. Obel. Seth had repeatedly tried to use it while forging, but never really succeeded. His observation had also leveled up after he kept abusing it on many different mobs in the dungeons. After wearing all his items and checking his status, Seth felt confident to successfully complete this exam. When Mina and the rest of the party arrived, their eyes bulged at the sight of the new golden armor, and they simply could not stop touching the hems of the jacket. Even Mike would find chances to casually touch it. "Listen up," a loud voice got their attention. It was the guild master with 3 groups of people behind him. He introduced the 2 B rank and the 1 A rank party as their proctors and examiners. The 3 parties were ogled with sparkling eyes. B rank's party S equipment was comparable to Seth's loadout, while each of the A ranks was clad in a full set of rare or above items. He knew that above rare came epic, but he actually could not appraise it with blacksmith's eyes yet. That's why they could have even better items among those he could not scan. The guild master explained the quest to them once again, and this time Seth got a system notification. Ding! A quest has been triggered. Quest: escort the palace caravan. Difficulty: A. Safely escort the merchant caravan all the way to its destination and return to Aura. Will you help the caravan reach its destination? Requirement: help the caravan reach Tora 0/1, survive. Rewards: become a B-rank adventurer, experience. Do you accept the quest? He had already decided to take part, so he accepted. The part that confused him was that the quest had a difficulty rating of A. Before he had time to further think about, Mina interrupted him. Come on, Seth. The caravan is leaving. The wagons had already started moving, with most of the adventurers have found a place in the open horse carts, or riding on their mounts along with the caravan. Just Seth and the party were still standing around. They started moving and found their place on the second to last cart in the line. Seth and Yulkat Esfer had gotten their roles in the briefing, and were part of the rear guard. Their task was to watch out for pursuers and react to attacks from behind. What one would not expect from an escort mission in a fantasy world was how terribly boring and uncomfortable it was to sit on a cart and just watch the surroundings. The cart was not spring-loaded or even padded in any way. His increased stats only helped him. If it wasn't for the party engaging in small talk, distracting him from his hurting butt and boredom, whether he would not have just dropped the quest. If Seth had to complain about something that really bothered him besides his bruised behind, then it was going to the toilet. He had gotten used to doing it in the wilderness, but what did one have to do to take a shit in peace? With more than 50 people in the caravan, it was hard to find a private place to take care of business. More than once he was interrupted, and the only pleasant interruption was when Mina could not hold back anymore and found him in the bushes to take care of her needs. Camping out actually felt quite nostalgic to Seth. Setting up a tent together with the others, sleeping in sleeping bags. Although they could take off their equipment during the night, when they were not on guard duty, it didn't mean the environment was safe. To discourage Mina from doing any stunts, the guys and girls slept in 2 separate tents. Lixus, the quarter-elven magician, could have an eye on her like this. The first 3 days were quiet. There were some monsters here and there, but nothing out of the ordinary, as far as Seth could tell. Some goblins, a pair of orcs, and a group of psychic wolves, really nothing that was able to make trouble for them. Before Seth could even move, they were taken care of by other parties. This was only because they were still traveling through the precursors of the mountain range. The terrain made a dramatic turnaround at the end of the 3rd day. The forested hills they had been traveling through until now slowly vanished as the road became steeper and steeper. More and more big boulders and short shrubbery dominated the landscape. At the end of the 3rd day, the caravan camped on a barren plateau at the foot of the mountains. The foreboding silhouettes Seth had been seeing at the horizon for the most part of the journey were now right before him. Rough rocky walls, slopes and cliffs, barren mountains with snow-covered peaks towered before his eyes, biting like teeth into the sky and swallowing a big part of his view. Standing there, Seth could barely lift his head high enough to see the sky above the mountain range. Seth was not a pure city child. His parents and he would go camping occasionally, but the lush mountains he knew seemed small and insignificant compared to the geological might of the central mountain range. The temperature had also noticeably dropped towards the end of the 3rd day, making some of the adventurers tremble in their armors. Seth was slightly better off, as his pants and jacket were made by a highly skilled tailor. They had a natural resistance against ordinary cold. But he also let out a sigh of relief, like most of the others when they set up camp. Except for the guards, everyone else could change into warm clothes and blankets to dispel the cold. The plateau they were on now was right outside the territory of the wyverns. Starting tomorrow they would travel under constant danger. As such, everyone properly warmed up and had a hearty meal. It would be the last warm meal for the next 3 days. Unfortunately for Seth, who had gotten used to good and warm meals during his journey, campfires and smoke could pull the attention of the wyverns and other monsters in the region. This meant that the next 3 days were not just full of danger, but that he could only eat rations that did not need to be cooked. He had bought all kinds of jerky and bread, but nothing could rival a warm, scrumptious meal. He had not been part of the guard duty this night, and was able to sleep, but the rushed and meager breakfast demotivated him almost as not getting enough sleep. But he understood why they had to set off before the break of dawn. The caravan could not stay too long in one place. Even if it was just the edge of their territory, the longer they remained the higher the chance of being discovered. Hoping to travel 3 days through the wyvern territory without any encounters was wishful thinking. In the afternoon of the 4th day, Seth heard a mixed piercing hiss and a guttural roar from the sky. Young wyvern LV-43. Above them circled 3 young wyverns. As relatives of the dragon race, their skin was densely covered in scales. Unlike a dragon who had 4 legs and 2 wings, their front legs had turned into wings, like a bat or a pterosaur. Their hind legs were big talons like a raptor's to grab their prey. Only their head looked like a real dragon's with piercing sharp eyes and long teeth like daggers. The only silver lining was that they had lost their dragon breath, so their attacks were purely physical. That was the explanation the guild master had given during the briefing. Hearing it and seeing it were 2 completely different things. Seth could imagine what wyverns looked like and had expectations from the novels and games he had played. All his imaginings were completely subverted when he saw the giant creature, with almost 30 m wingspan gliding through the air. Their talons long and curved like sabers glinted in a metallic black. Their slender, snake-like bodies exuded an aura of strength and might. When their eyes fell on the adventurers and merchant on the ground, they stood still, petrified by a sudden pressure weighing down on them. Dragon might, despite only being relatives, they still had the aura that made dragons the peak of the food chain. An oppressive feeling grasped his heart. Seth felt like a mouse confronted by a giant snake. Only the A and B rank parties that came along as examiners were unaffected by the sudden status effect. After the initial shock, Seth felt the pressure slowly lessening. He looked around, saw some of the other adventurers kneeling with expressions of absolute panic, while most were still unable to move. Was it because of fear resistance or calm reaction? He didn't know, and also didn't he take the time to think about it. He shook Mina, Mike and the rest of the party awake. The wyverns had used dragon might. It meant they would soon dive down to reap their stunned prey. The party summoned their pet and got in formation before back away. Keeping their eyes on the sky, they closed in on the other adventurers and merchants of the caravan to try and wake them from their stupor. They were not the only ones who got to their senses early, and with the help of the other 2 parties, they managed to wake up most of the adventurers. As fast as they were still in disorder when one wyvern decided to attack. Archers scrambled to lift their bows and shoot at the incoming reptile. Most arrows bounced off the hard scales, with only a few dealing damages thanks to item effects or skills. Ignoring the flimsy arrows, it dove into the crowd and grabbed one of the adventurers that were still stunned and unable to evade the massive claws. The saber-like talons easily penetrated his plate armor as if it was paper. Impaled in 3 different places by curves pike, the thickness of an arm would instantly kill anyone. It should. But in the short time, before he was whisked away, he started screaming in panic. The man grabbed was the tank of his party. His extraordinary endurance and passive skills forced him to not only not die, but also experience the situation fully awake. He left behind a blood-curdling long-drawn screech, as he was pulled into the air and ripped apart by the wyvern fangs. As shocked as everyone was, they pulled themselves together. There were another 2 hungry wyverns, and who knew whether the third was really satisfied with one victim. Mentioning the other 2, they also started closing in and making attempts to dive into the crowd. But at this point, everyone had woken up from the dragon might and was able to dodge the deadly charges. Seth also equipped his bow and started shooting arrows, but his arrows also bounced off the scales. The best they could do was punching holes into the wing membranes. Even when the bow's effect activated, all their weaknesses were armored. The arrow could not even penetrate their eyelids. The wyvern just needs to blink to block his arrows. Soon magicians were done casting, and the arrows were joined by attack magic hailing onto the wyverns. This would have been great, if wyvern had no inherited magic resistance, too. The magic attacks dealt just slightly more damage than the arrows. Seth felt a little peeved. These were arrows he had made himself, and he had been quite confident in them. Very well then, he thought, and changed his arrows. He switched his arrows to the ones with bodkin-type heads. The pyramid-shaped arrowheads with sharp edges were specialized in armor penetration. Bodkin arrow. Uncommon. Damage, 45. Durability, 50. Arrows with a tip specialized in dealing damage against armored targets. 50% armor penetration, 10% armor destruction. The least archers bothered bringing different sets of arrows, especially since this kind of arrows would normally be used in wars between humans, not to hunt monsters. Who would bother to spend the extra money and bring specialized arrows, when skills usually sufficed? The effect was clearly evident. Every time Seth's arrow hit, the hit wyvern would let a pain-filled screech. The scales of the wyvern could not simply deflect or block the new arrows and were penetrated. They stayed stuck in the beast's flesh, causing it terrible pain. The arrows did little to shorten its health bar. But for a creature like a wyvern that was the king of its territory, and got rarely hurt thanks to its overwhelming physique, directly inflicting pain was even worse than to other targets. With a smirk, Seth kept shooting his frightening projectiles, and the wyverns actually started to pay attention to him, and tried to evade his attacks. Only his. Even their random dive attacks had stopped as they tried to evade the little man's mean stingers. Since he already got the wyvern's attention, it did not take long for the other people to notice the beast's strange behavior. The wyverns in the sky decided that this prey was not worth the pain for now and let off. Seth had not hit any vitals like the eyes yet, but who would not run from an acupuncture treatment with rusty nails? After the threat was gone, all eyes focused on Seth, who seemed to be the reason. Even Mina and her party were astonished by his deed. He had never used any weapon other than the spear in front of them, so they were double as astonished as the rest of the caravan. Seth didn't know how to deal with the sudden attention. How could he have known this would happen? It wasn't his fault those big lizards were afraid of a little pain. Even the A-rank party stepped closer. It was a group of 2 women and 3 men. At the front was a leader in light leather armor, and a sword on his waist. He looked like he was in his early 30s. Behind him was a girl in a tight robe and blue hair. The eyes behind her round glasses were focused on the bow in his hands. She whispered something to the leader. He pondered a moment before speaking to Seth. "Well done. Follow me for a moment," he said solemnly and turned around to leave. Seth shrugged and followed. At least he got out of that awkward situation. The A-rank party and Seth went to the head of the caravan where the carriages of the examiners were located. The leader signaled him to enter the carriage with him. He started speaking the moment Seth sat down. One of the first to recover from dragon might. Good first reaction. Flexible in choice of weapons and adapting to the situation. Well prepared in range and quality of equipment. He sighed. "I dare say that you have good chances to pass this exam. But that is not why I asked you to come. I asked you here to give you a little advice. Try not to stand out too much. People can see that the bow is special, even without an appraisal skill. And stupid people might attempt stupid things. Be careful. That's all." With that, Seth was dismissed without being able to even say a single word. It felt like he was scolded for bragging when he didn't even intend to stand out. He could only shrug and let it be. The milk was spilled already. He returned to Mina and the others who were waiting for him at the end of the caravan. So what did the big boss want? Mina, who could not hold back her curiosity, exclaimed. I think I got praised and scolded at the same time. He tried to summarize but ended up recounting the short conversation as the others kept asking for details. They congratulated him when he said that he will likely pass the exam, and became solemn when he told them about the advice. Now that you mention it, what's up with that bow? Asked Lixus, intrigued. As a true gold digger, she was interested in everything expensive and rare. It's actually not that extraordinary if you ask me. It just has the option to inflict increased pain, which was probably the reason the wyverns turned away. He played it down. There was no need to mention its true abilities to everyone he knows. This was their first encounter with the wyverns. The caravan didn't celebrate for long. The adventurers got back in formation, and the caravan hurried along. They needed to keep going to reach the next spot for camping. The dwarves had created several checkpoints along the trade route, where they either cut completely new halls into the mountains or expanded existing caves and caverns. In these places, everyone from single travelers to big merchant caravans like theirs could stay the night without having to fear a wyvern attack. Their way led through mountain valleys and passes with little vegetation, and biting cold winds howling through the landscape. Some people actually had their priests cast buffs to endure the cold. After his talk with the head examiner, few people had the time to ask him about the bow. The journey from here on was mostly silent, as everyone conserved their energy to walk. Yes, walking. They had reached the point where the carts and horses already had a hard time traversing the steep and rough road. Having everyone walk beside the carts and wagons was not only faster at this point, but everyone stayed on guard this way. At least the horses had no chance to panic and hurt themselves during the encounter with the wyverns, as they were completely petrified in fear. Had they lost any of the horses, one of the adventurers' pets would have had to take that role. Or worse, the people would have had to pull the cart. It was not dark yet, but the sun had already vanished beyond the mountain peaks. Trudging along the snow-covered roads, everyone's motivation hit rock bottom. Even Seth felt the cold now, slowly crawling under his skin. When he felt unobserved, he would use short bursts of flames to cover his skin below the armor. Even if someone looked, it would only seem like a short glow from the inside of his armor. He had to be very careful, not to damage his armor though. The rest of the party was walking beside him, but their eyes either looked on the ground or into the distance as they tried to keep the warmth inside their bodies. They were still the rear guard, walking at the very end of the long procession of people and wagons. At the moment they were ascending steep serpentines towards a mountain pass. The higher they got, the stronger and louder became the wind howling through the gap between two peaks. In the narrow chasm up above was the checkpoint for tonight's camp. Supposedly there was the entrance to a big and safe cave somewhere along the 90% steep rock faces of the pass. If this wasn't such an inhospitable place, it would have been the perfect place for an ambush. But no bandits dared to dwell in these mountains. This made it one of the best places to stay, as the pass was too narrow for the wyverns to dive into. Seth cursed. Speaking of the devil. Just when their goal was in sight, and he thought they would reach temporary safety, he heard the familiar roar in the sky. Like overgrown vultures, they appeared circling in the sky. This time everyone was ready. The caravan leader gave the signal for the carts and wagon to speed up, while the priests cast shields and buffs against the dragon might. Safety was already in sight, a short sprint would not hurt anyone. While the wagons sped up, so did the adventurers, but they stayed in formation and kept their attention on the wyverns in the sky. There were 6 wyverns this time, but the 3 from last time were not among them. They looked even bigger and more ferocious than the ones from earlier that day. They did not attack yet, so Seth did not dare to use observation and provoke them, but he guessed that these had to be at least grown adults. He and the party were at the very end of the caravan, so they would be the last to get to safety. Fortunately, other parties fell back to ensure the caravan's back and reinforcing their position. With 3 C-rank parties and their pets making up the rear guard, it did not feel like anyone was going to be left behind. Their actions did not remain unnoticed. The wyverns were not dragons, but they still had a good amount of brain power. They saw their prey hurrying towards the tight place they could not enter and became aggravated. Playing and instilling fear was one thing, but letting their prey get away was unacceptable. As such, the beasts started attacking shortly after the caravan increased the speed. Seth used his observation and got a bad feeling about the situation. 4 of them were adult wyvern LV47 as Seth had expected, but the last one was shown as old wyvern LV50. Their level difference was not big and Seth could only see their names, but the pressure they gave off was completely different. If pitted against each other, the old-timer seemed strong enough to take down the other 4 on his own. The 4 adult ones started to attack the caravan, while the old one stayed in the air. Since the dragon might had not worked, they gave up on simple dive attacks on the people. The casters had a hard time shielding the fleeing wagon from the claws of 2 of them. The other 2 landed on the ground and started to directly attack the adventurers. They had evaded the bigger group at the end of the caravan, and were attacking from the sides where the manpower was lacking. Whether the beats had planned it or not, instead of forming an even group and fighting together, the adventurers split up into their original parties to fight the wyverns. Not only were they ineffective as they lacked the cohesion and teamwork between different parties, but it also meant that Seth and the other were actually left alone when their reinforcements rushed off to attack the landed wyverns. These fuckers. They were now only 5 people in the rearguard trying to keep up with the caravan. Promptly one of the wyverns still in the air landed beside the easy prey. The monster landed on the last cart of the caravan, crushing it underfoot and cutting off their way towards the caravan. There was nothing they could do but get into formation and prepare for the fight. What had they trained for if not for this? The wyvern rushed at them, but was blocked by a shield of light Bulko had summoned quick-wittedly. Having bought some time with this, everyone summoned their pets and Bulko the ogre priest and Puffles, the mighty, cast their buffs on the party and pets. When the shield broke under the force of the wyvern's second bite, its face got blasted by a light bolt and fire lance from Puffles and Lixus respectively. Wyverns have thick faces, so it was only slightly hurt by the caster's quick attack. This wasn't a problem. Using the short time it was occupied by the magic, Seth and Mike dashed forward and under the body of the wyvern. With Seth on the right and Mike on the left, they stopped below its wings and started slashing and stabbing at its thick scaly legs. They aimed to cut the beast's tendons. If they could incapacitate its legs, it would lose all mobility. It would not even be able to set off and fly away. The wyvern let out a painful shriek as Seth's spear easily penetrated its less armored calves. The wyvern looked away from the party in the front and bent down its neck to bite Seth. Instead of pulling the spear out, he changed the grip and started pushing with all his strength as he charged away from the giant maws. Holding the spear like an oar and pushing forward, the spear tip moved like a fillet knife, cut along the calf muscle, and ended up severing the tendon on its way out. Losing the support of its right leg, coupled with the momentum of the turn when it tried to bite Seth, made the giant reptile plummet forward where it landed on its left wing. Between the weight of its own massive body and the rough rocky ground, its fine wing bones were ground to dust. Mike had been unable to land a decisive cut on his leg, and his attempt were rudely interrupted by a massive tail swatting him away as the beast plunged to the ground. Mike got the expressway to leave the combat zone, but Seth was still in danger. The wyvern was in pain and angry, and Seth was the only one in its field of view. As he ran away, there was a long neck with sharp teeth and angry eyes diving after him. He had no time to run far and could only block the giant maws with teeth as long as his upper arm by shoving the spear in to block the jaws from closing. Furious eyes were burning a hole into him as the pressure kept increasing. The wooden shaft started bending as the spear tip started slowly digging into the roof of its mouth. As the shaft started breaking and the splinters kept popping off the spear, Seth felt like his last hour had come. In this moment of struggle, a shadow appeared above the wyvern's head. A figure with 2 daggers landed there and rammed one dagger in each of the wyvern's wide-open eyes. Mina, the assassin, had finally decided to move and save his life. In agony, the wyvern waved its head around, throwing off the figure and ripping the spear out of Seth's hand. Not caring about the spear, he dashed away and caught Mina on the way. With the girl in his arms, joined back with the rest of the party. Lixus and Boko were helping Mike, who had a rough landing after being flung away. He was okay except for some bruises.